On March 1st, 2022, at the age of 77, Roger Kemp passed away in his home in Livewood. He was the best husband and father who cared for his family until the very last minute. However, a single memory from 20 years ago haunted Roger until his death, as it had completely changed his life. For 2 long years, he was forced to become a meticulous investigator to find the person responsible for his only daughter's untimely demise. If not for Roger's involvement, the case might have remained unsolved as the police were nearly powerless. But beyond the police, there was Roger, who could not allow the criminal to go unpunished. Let's return to the past and see what happened on that tragic day. Let's begin. Our story took place in the small suburb of Livewood, Kansas, a very small and safe town in the state. Here, all the neighbors know each other by name and wish you a good day upon meeting. The morning of June 18, 2002, started as usual for 19-year-old Alexandra Kemp. Her father had gone to work, her younger brother was still in bed, and her mother was making a delicious breakfast. Alexandra didn't finish her coffee because she was in a hurry to get to work. Allie, as her loved ones affectionately called her, had just finished her first year of college and returned to her hometown for the summer holidays. She got a job as a lifeguard at an outdoor public pool, where her boyfriend and brother were already working. That day there were almost no visitors, and Allie calmly inspected the area and cleaned the auxiliary premises. Allie entered the pump room and turned around when an unfamiliar voice greeted her. She politely asked him to leave the restricted area and pointed to the door, but he attacked her and started tearing at her clothes. Allie hit him in the face, but he was much stronger. She tried to scream, but he covered her mouth with his hand, and the noise from the operating pumps left no chance to be heard. The next moment, Allie lost consciousness. Sometime later, her brother Tyler came to the pool to take over her shift. He saw her personal belongings on a table, but could not find her anywhere. He searched all around, calling her by name, but Allie did not respond. In a panic, the young man called their father. Roger dropped everything and rushed to the pool. Together with Tyler, they carefully inspected the surrounding area, and to his relief, Roger found that Allie was not in the pool. Upon entering the pump room, Roger saw a large piece of tarpaulin. Shining a flashlight in the dim room, he noticed a pool of blood on the floor, and then a foot sticking out from under the tarp. The father threw off the tarp and cried out at the sight. He fell to his knees, trying to bring her to her senses, but she was unresponsive. At 5:29 p.m., Roger Kemp called the emergency services to report that his daughter had been fatally injured. Throughout the call, the father tried to revive his daughter. He tenderly covered her with his jacket, but blood continued to seep from the inflicted wounds. Roger talked to her and pleadingly asked her not to leave, but the girl was unconscious. The victim was urgently taken to the hospital, where the death of 19-year-old Allie Kemp was confirmed. "I hoped she was still conscious and could hear me, but she never came back," Roger said shortly after arriving at the local hospital. Alexandra Elizabeth Kemp suffered multiple head injuries from blunt force trauma, with a pool of blood nearby. Her shirt was torn, she was without pants and underwear, and there were signs of strangulation on her neck. Several of her fingers were broken, and her nails were torn off, suggesting that she had been brutally assaulted before being deprived of life. The pump room, where Allie's body was found, was in disarray, with items strewn about chaotically. It became clear that there had been a fierce struggle between Allie and her assailant, in which she did not give up, but he proved to be stronger. After her life was declared ended, the victim's body was sent for forensic examination, and the crime scene was thoroughly inspected. Unfortunately, the weapon used in the crime was not found either in the pump room or on the pool premises. However, a blood-stained tube of ointment, usually kept in the first aid kit, was found at the crime scene, which investigators found peculiar. They needed to determine why it was found near the victim's body. The ointment tube and its cap were collected for analysis. Police Chief Craig Hill, who inspected the crime scene, expressed his condolences to the parents of the deceased Allie Kemp and stated that in his 35 years of service, this was probably the most horrific crime that could occur in the Livewood community. This crime shocked the quiet town and left too many questions, both for the public and for the investigators. The investigation was puzzled, as one of the main questions in the crime against the young woman was the motive. The first suspected motive was robbery, but her purse and all its contents were untouched, which completely ruled out this theory. The second suspected motive was an assault, but after receiving the forensic examination report, it was established that Ali had not been subjected to intimate violence. The lack of either of these two motives, and indeed any motive at all, made the crime mysterious and strange even to experienced investigators. So who needed to end the life of a young woman whose life had just begun in such a brutal way? Alexandra Elizabeth Kemp was born on October 11, 1982, in the city of Livewood. She was the long-awaited first child in the Kemp family and their only daughter. Ali grew up in a loving home with her parents and two brothers in the idyllic, tree-lined suburb of Livewood. She graduated from high school with honors, loved soccer and poetry, and was voted the most beautiful girl in 8th grade. Following her dreams, Ali enrolled at Kansas State University. In 2002, she had just completed her first year at university and returned to her hometown of Livewood, where her family and boyfriend awaited her. She took a job as part of the service staff at the local pool, just 4 blocks from her family's home. It was a wonderful job at a nearby pool where her brother and boyfriend were already working. Thus, Ali was a young, promising woman who grew up surrounded by love and care, and who certainly could not have had any enemies. Investigators continued to explore various theories about the assault and interviewed friends and acquaintances of Ali to get a more complete picture of the day of the crime. One of the first suspects was Ali's boyfriend. Phil House had known Ali since school, and by 2002, they had been a couple for over 5 years. It seemed Phil had no reason to harm Ali, but the police had to consider him a suspect. During questioning, Phil explained that Ali had replaced him at the pool at 2 p.m., after which he went to another job. He was there until 4 p.m., then he was at a friend's house playing video games until he received a call about Ali being in the hospital. Phil's alibi was confirmed by colleagues and friends he had been playing games with. However, the police did obtain crucial information from him. It turned out that Ali had called him at 2:52 p.m., but Phil couldn't answer. When he called her back at 3:44 p.m., she did not pick up the phone, which led investigators to suspect that Ali met her tragic fate during this time frame. Despite the desire to solve the case quickly, this clue did not bring the police any closer to finding the criminal. There was hope in the testimony of potential witnesses, as there should have been plenty on a summer day at a public pool. However, due to unfortunate weather conditions, the pool was almost empty that day. The search for any clues or testimonies was progressing very slowly. A few days later, after re-interviewing the pool staff and the surrounding areas, it was established that on the day of the crime, 2 employees from a lawn service company were working in the parking lot. They were brought in for questioning, where they described noticing a car driving around the parking lot in circles around 2:40 p.m., occasionally leaving but then returning. They were able to provide a clear description of the suspicious vehicle, a beige 1980 Ford pickup. Although the police did not have the vehicle's license number, they now had a piece of important information. However, even more valuable information came from one of Ali's friends. The testimony of Ali's friend, Laurel Wynn, helped provide a description of the suspected criminal. It turned out that around 3 p.m. that day, Ali called her friend Laurel and asked her to keep her company during her shift at the pool, as the day was cloudy and not very warm, so there were hardly any visitors. Laurel agreed, and after a while her car pulled into the pool parking lot. She called Ali, but there was no answer. Not seeing Ali outside, Laurel blew loudly on a lifeguard whistle, thinking it would be amusing. At that moment, a man exited the pump room, pretending to talk on the phone. Laurel thought he might be Ali's boss, so she quickly left the pool to avoid causing her friend any trouble. As she left the pool area, the man turned around and waved at Laurel, allowing her to remember his face. Laurel did not wait for a call from her friend and left. Assuming she had seen the criminal, the police created and published a composite sketch based on Laurel's description, hoping it would lead them to the criminal. Thus, a very accurate sketch of the presumed criminal was made. The sketch and the description of the suspicious vehicle were broadcasted on local television. Undoubtedly, such publicity increased the chances of identifying and capturing the criminal, and the police indeed received a massive number of reports from people who believed they had seen this man. This led the investigation to its first suspect, James Drider. A young man, Drider owned an old Ford pickup and closely resembled the composite sketch. He lived in Olade, approximately 20 minutes' drive from Livewood, where he worked as a mechanic in a small auto repair shop. Upon obtaining the address of the presumed suspect, police visited him at his workplace. However, James vehemently denied any involvement in the assault, and he had an alibi since he was at work all day. His boss confirmed that he was indeed at the auto shop on June 18th. Thus, despite a striking resemblance to the composite, James Drider was excluded from the list of suspects. The search continued. Months passed and the trail began to cool, but Roger never gave up. While detectives worked on every lead, he pursued new ones. Roger relentlessly conducted his own investigations. He regularly visited the police station, offering various ideas for capturing the criminal. Roger's unyielding efforts led him to appear on America's Most Wanted, where, in addition to sharing Ali's story, the composite sketch of the presumed suspect was shown. The popular show was broadcast not only on local television but also nationally. A new wave of messages flooded into police stations. Each message was meticulously processed, but for various reasons, each newly emerged suspect was almost immediately ruled out. Ali's boyfriend of 5 years, Phil House, also assisted. He initiated a virtual hunt, sending out emails to university students. He urged them to look at the composite sketch and watch the America's Most Wanted episode focusing on Ali's case. A reward of $50,000 was offered for any information leading to an arrest. Despite all efforts, the case again reached a dead end. However, 6 months after Ali's murder, detectives received new information about the previously familiar James Drider. It turned out that in January 2003, news outlets in neighboring Colorado reported the search for a man responsible for 3 assaults. Roger recognized Drider from the wanted sketch, who had been previously excluded as a suspect in Ali's murder and was now wanted for assaults. Despite Drider's alibi on the day of Ali Kemp's murder, the police now had no doubts they had found their suspect. But first, they needed to prove James's involvement. The man had no prior convictions, so he wasn't in the database, and investigators couldn't compare DNA. They needed to check this individual again and obtain his DNA to compare it with the DNA found at the crime scene. By this point, James Drider was on the run, making him very difficult to locate. It took the police 3 weeks to find him. At a gas station in Utah, Drider failed to pay for his fuel, and the staff detained him, calling the police. James Drider faced charges for 3 assaults and possibly also for the murder of Ali Kemp. When police compared his DNA sample with the sample from the crime scene, they were disappointed to find no matches. James Drider was a serial offender, but he did not end Ali Kemp's life. This was a major setback as the investigation had come incredibly close to apprehending the suspect, only for detectives to have to start over from scratch. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, with the police still having no new suspects in Ali Kemp's case. 2 years passed and the police's interest in the case gradually waned, but not Ali's father, Roger. He did everything within his power to find his daughter's assailant, though his options were limited. He periodically contacted USA Today, which published the composite sketch of the presumed suspect. Roger desperately searched for a broad-faced, somewhat bald man. He posted wanted notices throughout the city. His goal as a devoted father was not only to find the criminal, but also to keep his daughter's story alive in the public consciousness. Then, one day, Roger had a simple and brilliant idea. At the city's entrance, he saw a billboard. It occurred to him that hundreds, even thousands of people saw this billboard daily. Why not place the composite sketch on it? He contacted an advertising company to rent the billboard. When the company's management learned about Mr. Kemp's story, they offered not just one, but 8 billboards along highways near Livewood for the poster, free of charge. The estimated total daily viewership of these billboards was about 10,000, and Roger's efforts finally began to bear fruit. 2 years after Ali Kemp's murder, police started receiving reports of people resembling the sketch. The billboard, along with a higher reward and television advertisements, led to a flurry of tips, including one about a young man named Benjamin Appleby. This individual lived in Bantam, Connecticut, where he was known as Ted Hoover. The 29-year-old man lived under the pseudonym Hoover to avoid prosecution for an intimate offense from 1997. He owned a Ford pickup of the same beige color as the vehicle the suspect was believed to drive. It later turned out that Ted Hoover worked in pool maintenance in 2002, specifically at the pool where Ali was murdered. Armed with this information, police went to question Ted Hoover at his home. During the conversation, he behaved uncertainly and was visibly nervous. At the end of the discussion, Ted was asked to provide a DNA sample to clear himself from the list of suspects. He was clearly unprepared for this request and tried to evade it by making excuses. Initially, he asked to postpone providing samples until he could speak with his lawyer and requested some time to think. The next day, the detective contacted Ted Hoover's lawyer, who informed him that Ted did not want his DNA entered into the national database and thus was opposed to voluntarily providing a DNA sample to the police. Detectives attempted to press the lawyer to provide a letter of assurance that the DNA would not be entered into any database and would only be used within the scope of Ali Kemp's case materials. The lawyer requested a pause to relay this information to his client. However, 2 days later, the lawyer responded that his client was still against providing his DNA to the police. The detectives were convinced that this individual had something to hide. They remembered that they had spoken with Ted Hoover at the crime scene of Ali's death many years ago, although he did not seem suspicious at the time. The police had questioned him in connection with Ali's case, but were unable to achieve the desired breakthrough. The investigators had no choice but to secure a warrant for the compulsory collection of Ted Hoover's DNA. On March 24, 2004, armed with a warrant, they returned to Ted Hoover's residence, only to find the house empty. The man had fled. Ted Hoover was officially declared wanted on suspicion of Ali Kemp's murder. During the search, Roger continued to play an active role. He returned to the proven method of publishing posters on billboards across neighboring states. He purchased over 500 billboard advertisements. Ted Hoover's face was displayed in Colorado, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, and Nebraska. To fund such a massive manhunt, Roger Kemp had to spend all his savings and even sell the home his family had lived in for over 20 years, as the entire billboard campaign now cost over $100,000. And it was not in vain. In August 2004, the police received a tip from Missouri that someone recognized the person from the billboard. However, the tip mentioned that this individual was now living not under the name Ted Hoover, but as Benjamin Appleby. The police went to the address provided in the tip, and indeed, they found the man known to them as Ted Hoover. He was arrested on the spot on suspicion of murder. The police legally obtained a saliva sample from him. Their suspicions were confirmed when the DNA of Benjamin Appleby, aka Ted Hoover, matched the DNA found at the crime scene. Benjamin had several prior run-ins with the law, ranging from robbery to intimate offenses. The police in Connecticut arrested him on an earlier warrant charging him with indecent exposure. When questioned about Ali's murder, he confessed to the police that he approached the girl he liked to flirt with her, but she did not reciprocate. When he tried to touch her, she pushed him away, causing Benjamin to lose control and assault her. Later, Benjamin was charged with murder and attempted assault. He was found guilty on both counts. "I strangled her, I guess. I don't know why the hell I did it," said Benjamin Appleby in a recorded interview. According to Appleby, he touched her. "Not strongly," he said, and when she resisted, he began to strangle and beat the 19-year-old girl. Then the detectives learned the horrifying reason why the antiseptic ointment was open. Appleby tried to assault Ali when she lost consciousness and he needed lubrication. In his defense, Benjamin Appleby said that he simply snapped, headed back to his car, and drove away. On December 10, 2005, on the final day of the trial against Benjamin Appleby, aka Ted Hoover, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison. He was found guilty under Kansas law, 50 years in prison with no chance for parole until 2054. However, Benjamin Appleby, who has been serving his sentence for several years now, has expressed doubts about the fairness of his sentence under the Kansas Hard 50 law. He argued that since the factors that led to his Hard 50 were determined by a judge, not a jury, as required by a previous U.S. Supreme Court ruling, Kansas law automatically required that his sentence be modified. Prosecutors contend that the state law does not apply to Benjamin Appleby's case, and that the Hard 50 should remain in effect. Roger Kemp warned the public that reducing the prison term for Benjamin Appleby would put other young women and girls at risk. This marked the end of Roger Kemp's struggle and his pursuit of the man who ended his daughter's life. His relentless determination to see Ali's assailant face justice led to a rather unusual idea. He wanted to use highway billboards so that every passerby could see the composite sketch. Roger Kemp's inventive idea of using billboards to reach more people proved very successful. Several states across the country decided to adopt similar measures with high success rates. After Benjamin Appleby's conviction, Roger Kemp founded the Ali Kemp Educational Foundation, named Take Defense. It offers self-defense training to girls and young women aged 12 to 23. Workshops are conducted nationwide. Participants have sent hundreds of testimonials from women saying that the training prevented attacks and even saved their lives. Until his last days, Kemp personally spoke at events and before each local class. Over 70,000 people across the country have taken this self-defense course. Later, he started a self-defense program for girls and women of all ages, named the Ali Kemp Educational Foundation, or simply TAKE. It teaches women how to protect themselves in dangerous situations. In 2011, Roger Kemp was also awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal for his work with the foundation. Out of 6,000 nominees, Kemp was one of 13 people to receive one of the highest honors a civilian can receive from the president. He believed his daughter would still be alive if she had known how to defend herself and, as a result, hoped to teach other women to do the same. Years after the tragic loss of his only beloved daughter, he still could not bear to describe the brutal assault on her and did not wish to recall that horrific day that completely changed his life. He ended her life because he attempted to attack her, and it's very hard for me to say assault her. He ended her life and then tried to assault her again, said Roger Kemp in an interview. Friends and acquaintances who took an active part in the search for Alexandra Kemp's assailant have become a close-knit family who still remember and mourn her sudden and unjust demise. Tireless, passionate, and kind, Roger Kemp passed away at the age of 77. He truly was a national treasure, said Jill Leaker, his friend and colleague. Roger Kemp's ingenuity helped hundreds of people find justice. Inspired by Kemp's idea, many other police departments across the country have adopted similar billboard strategies. To date, these billboards have helped authorities in Kansas alone capture more than 30 fugitives. Once, on a popular TV show, Roger Kemp said, "You have two choices. You can stay in bed and pull the covers over your head, or you can get out and fight the battle. I chose to fight. I would never let this guy win." And he kept his word. By his efforts, he protected the community from a brutal criminal who surely would have repeated his actions. Honor and praise to such a devoted, loving father and truly strong individual. Imagine that today we will visit a Hollywood movie studio where they shoot the best movies in the world of different genres. But instead of a movie pavilion, we will find ourselves in Wilbur, Nebraska, and our movie for today is a bloody thriller. Nebraska is the territory of the Great Plains. It is located in Tornado Alley. In spring and summer, there are often severe thunderstorms and tornadoes. Nebraska is the only tri-state that is landlocked, which means to get from Nebraska to the ocean, bay or bay, you have to cross 3 states. Passing motorists don't like to stop on a dark country road, but a flat tire forced Michael to make a stop on a remote dark highway. He pulled over to the side of the road and got out of the car. As he walked around the car, his attention was drawn to a large black bag, the kind used for throwing out garbage, but the bag had an unusual shape. Michael returned to the car, took a flashlight from the glove compartment, and illuminated the bag. It was torn open. There was a stain on the ground around it. Something had leaked out of it, and something light-colored was flickering out of the holes. Moving closer, the man froze at what he saw. A human hand was sticking out of the bag. A call to the emergency services raised the whole town. A few minutes later, investigators arrived on the country highway and thoroughly inspected the area. They confirmed that the package they found contained human remains. The package was sent for examination, and the searchers continued to comb the surrounding area. The recovered remains were soon identified. The victim was 24-year-old Cindy Loofe. Sydney Irene Loofe was born on August 21, 1993 in Broken Bow, Nebraska. She grew up in Arcadia with her parents George and Susie Loofe. Sydney's family moved to Neligh in 2000, at which time she was in second grade. Her mother Susie was a special education teacher, and her father George was the school principal. Sydney was always a very active child. The girl had a normal, happy childhood filled with a love of nature. She loved fishing, which her father always took her to. During her school years, Cindy played basketball and golf, where she made good progress, but developed scoliosis, curvature of the spine, forced to give up many of her favorite hobbies and put a cross on her sports career. In 2011, after graduating from high school, Sydney got a job at a local Menards store that specialized in home improvement products. The Loofes were a close-knit family, and when Sydney had to move from Norfolk to Lincoln because of work, they all made sure to keep in touch almost every day and often met for dinner. Even though Sydney lived separately, she often returned home to her parents' house. But lately, Sydney had been struggling with depression and felt that the medications she was taking were only making things worse. Susie was very worried about her daughter and recommended a new doctor for her. He prescribed her various medications. In phone conversations with her mom, Sydney told how her inner state was getting back to normal, her voice sounding quite optimistic. She was trying to make some changes in her life and was looking for a new job. For a young woman, working in a store was not the limit of her dreams. She did not know what she wanted to become or what to do with her career, and these worries led to a rather depressive state. In November 2017, her mental state deteriorated to the point where she started taking antidepressants and sometimes allowed herself to smoke pot. Her family and friends were supportive in every way possible, but she wanted not only companionship, but also love. Being young and modern, Sydney had an interest in the female gender, so she would sometimes look for other girls on social media for dating purposes. To find a friend, Sydney used Tinder, an app that allows millions of people around the world to find, fall in love, and date. In November 2017, she found a girl named Audrey, and the girl replied to her. They began to correspond. The girls found many common interests, such as gambling, hiking, and delicious food. Already after 100 messages, they decided to meet. On November 14th, Sydney headed over to Audrey's house to Wilbur. Their first meeting went so well that Sydney was very happy. They liked each other and agreed to meet again at Audrey's house. On November 15th, Sydney worked her shift at the store and went home. She cleaned herself up, styled her hair, and did her makeup. Before going out, she took a photo and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date." After the photo, she got a message to go out, with Audrey waiting for her in the car. The girls drove off. The next day, Sydney Loofe didn't show up for work. But even though she had been in high spirits for the past few days because of her new acquaintance, her family was concerned when co-workers informed them that she didn't show up for work because it was nothing like their responsible Sydney. Susie spoke of her daughter suffering from anxiety and deep depression. Just days before her disappearance, Loofe had discussed her deteriorating mental health with her family, who advised her to see a doctor again to take antidepressants. That was the last time Loofe's family saw Sydney. The girl's parents went to her apartment and were extremely surprised that Sydney had left her favorite cat Mimsy without food or water. This was extremely unlike a caring landlady. The parents knew how much Sydney loved her cat and never left her alone for long. They were concerned and reported Sydney missing to the police. The apartment itself was locked. When the police did a welfare check of Sydney's home, they saw nothing out of the ordinary. But the family was adamant. Something was wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16, 2017, the 5'7" blonde was reported missing after she failed to show up at the showroom of the Menard store where she worked, at 27th Street and Cornhusker Highway. Sydney suffered from a spinal condition and walked in a different way that would make her stand out from the crowd. She was wearing a white Columbia brand jacket and a cream-colored shirt. When testifying about the prior events before she went missing, her parents told police that she told her friend on Snapchat Wednesday morning that she had gone on a date with a woman she met online Tuesday night and planned to meet up with her again Wednesday night. Sydney's car, which she left in Northeast Lincoln, was found. Police officers said they have conducted interviews and were looking for any leads that could lead to Sydney or her trail. Loofe's family distributed flyers saying she may have been abducted 40 miles southwest of Lincoln, where the latest information indicated her cell phone was communicating with a tower. The flyer also noted that there was no activity in her bank account and that her cell phone was turned off the night she disappeared. The flyers gave a description of the young woman and distinguishing features such as several tattoos, one on her arm with the words, "Everything will be great someday," a yin-yang sign under her elbow, and the word "believe" on her wrist. Anyone with information on Sydney Loofe's whereabouts has been asked to contact police by phone. A huge appeal to find Sydney was launched, which included highway billboards with the girl's picture, and a manhunt was also launched on the TV news. Susie persisted in claiming that something had happened to Sydney after the date her daughter had gone on. To prove her point, she took a screenshot of a post that Sydney posted on Snapchat with her picture and the caption, "Ready for my date." Sydney's friends confirmed that she was going on a date with a woman she met through Tinder named Audrey. During the search, police reviewed Sydney's phone records and surveillance footage from the store where she worked and quickly identified the person they wanted to talk to. The last time Sydney's phone rang a cell tower in the Wilbur neighborhood, probably not far from Audrey's home, but police had no idea who she was. Authorities began searching for a woman named Audrey, the last person to see Sydney alive, but no one knew how to find her because no one knew who she was or if she had a real name. To the police's rescue came Sydney's friend Brooklyn, who decided to find Audrey herself through Tinder. She downloaded the app, found Audrey, and exchanged phone numbers with her. That's how police learned Audrey's real name. She turned out to be 26-year-old Bailey Boswell. It turned out that Bailey's apartment is within reach of the very cell tower where Sydney's phone was last seen connected to the tower. It also became known that this apartment Bailey shared with her partner, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. So who are Bailey and Aubrey? Bailey Boswell grew up in Lyons, Iowa. She grew up in a wholesome, normal family, was a friendly kid, and did well in school. Bailey had success in basketball and was an excellent runner. However, after losing her father, her life changed direction, and after graduating from high school, Bailey went down the wrong path. Bad company, alcohol, and illicit drugs came into her life. On one of the dating websites, she met Aubrey after a looking for a daddy status. Aubrey Trail had a depressing past. He had multiple fraud charges, fraudulent check fraud, and theft. Aubrey created his own cult where he called himself the Vampire Daddy. He paid women $200 a week to follow his rules. The rules were strange enough, but there were women who believed Aubrey. At the time of Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey were ordered by the court to pay over $400,000 for fraud. They also had numerous misdemeanors on the two of them, but the couple managed to go on the run. On November 19th, 2017, after obtaining a warrant, police searched Bailey and Aubrey's home. An inspection of the apartment revealed that some of the walls had been scrubbed with bleach, which was confirmed by a neighbor who had noticed the acrid smell of chlorinated substances 2 days earlier. Police actively began searching for the suspects. While on the run, they posted videos on Facebook saying they had no involvement in Sydney's disappearance and hoped for her safe return. Bailey claimed she went on 2 dates with Sydney, but dropped her off at a friend's house and never heard from her again. She said, "I just want Sydney's family to know that I'm really sorry, but I had nothing to do with it. I hope Sydney is found very soon. She's a lovely, amazing girl." It took police a few days to track down the couple, but they eventually found them at a hotel in Branson, Missouri. Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail were taken into custody. A few weeks after Sydney was reported missing, after carefully analyzing phone records and Bailey's location records, police discovered Sydney's remains. She had been dismembered. Her body had been cut into 14 pieces, and police found 13 of her body parts in black plastic garbage bags in ditches in Clay County. Some of her organs, including her heart, were missing. This is just horrific. A total of 16 crime scenes were found with Sydney's remains or personal belongings. Her car keys, driver's license, phone case were found along the highway. All the routes matched the movements of the two perpetrators. Forensics conducted autopsies on 13 body parts that were found. There were abrasions on Sydney's wrists, a bump on her head, torn earlobes, abrasions and contusions on her back. There were wounds on her body indicating that Sydney had fought for her life. The heartbreaking discovery shocked not only Sydney Loofe's family and friends, but all of Nebraska. On December 11, 2017, the Loofe family held a private funeral for Sydney at the Lutheran church the girl attended during her lifetime. Bailey and Aubrey were charged with first-degree murder, improper disposal of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. Aubrey also pleaded not guilty to felony murder and conspiracy, but pleaded guilty to improper disposal of human remains. Each successive deposition of Aubrey differed from the previous one. The man was constantly confused, changing the course of action and adding different actors. When Aubrey first talked to the police after his arrest, he told them about the cult he and Bailey were involved in. He talked about witchcraft and told them that he was a vampire who could fly. Aubrey portrayed himself as the leader of this cult and a vampire, and assured them that he had witches in the cult who had to kill another woman to get powers. So at one of his first court hearings, he admitted that he killed Sydney Loofe, but did it completely by accident. He said that he paid her $5,000 to fulfill his intimate fantasy with 2 other women. Sydney agreed, but died accidentally during the intimate act when he accidentally strangled her with a cord. He also admitted that he disposed of the body by cutting her into pieces, as it was a ritual in accordance with his religious beliefs. He had to drain all the blood to release her soul to the gods in a sacred place and lay out her body parts to help her reincarnate faster. But this version turned out to be false. Surveillance footage provided, dated November 14th, shows Bailey and Aubrey checking into a hotel in Lincoln, not far from where Sydney lives. And then, on November 15th, they visit a home improvement store, which shows them buying a gruesome array of tools: a hacksaw, chlorine bleach, a folding saw, a stationery knife, and the bags used for Sydney's remains. On November 15th at 12:01 in the afternoon, a surveillance camera captured Sydney crossing paths with Aubrey at the Menards store during business hours. But the girl had no idea at the time who he was or how cruelly fate would play her. On June 11th, 2018, the first court hearing was held for the murder and improper burial of Sydney Loofe's remains. Separate trials were ordered, but the charge was essentially the same for both. The trials were held in Lexington because attorneys argued that Bailey and Aubrey would not get a fair trial in Wilbur because of the publicity surrounding the case. The prosecution argued that Sydney was murdered. She was strangled, and the crime was a premeditated attack that was carefully planned. Aubrey and Bailey were declared ringleaders of a group that was interested in recruiting young women for intimate games. Bailey therefore used Tinder to find the women. At trial, the jury heard testimony from 3 other women who said they had been in relationships with Aubrey and Bailey at different times, and their acquaintance also began on Tinder. All of them had been involved with Bailey and had participated in intimate acts with Bailey and Aubrey. One woman said she even traveled with them after they met. She said Aubrey gave her a weekly allowance of $200 and invited her to join his cult. He called the cult members witches and said she had to torture and kill someone to join them. She testified that Bailey was called a witch queen. Another woman testified that Bailey talked in great detail about breaking her fingers and her desire to dismember the body. She liked to talk about torture. All 3 women who testified made it clear that both Bailey and Aubrey were involved in all the talk about torture and the crime. It is quite strange that in our modern world, there are still people who believe in the horrors of exorcism and try to assure the rest of us that they do. Talking about the investigation and the evidence obtained, the prosecution reconstructed the picture of what happened on the tragic evening of November 15, 2017. Sydney was getting ready for a date with a woman she had known for a couple days. They texted on Tinder and Bailey picked Sydney up from her apartment. They went for a ride in Bailey's car. After a while, the car stopped at Bailey's house, where Sydney was lured into the apartment. There, Bailey and Aubrey pounced on her as soon as she went inside and strangled her with an extension cord on the living room floor. The apartment was then thoroughly cleaned out by Bailey and Aubrey, a part the prosecution alleged was also pre-planned. They then cut Sydney into pieces and dumped her remains in Clay County the next day, November 16th. The court heard from their landlord, Jennifer Call, who testified that on November 16th, as soon as she drove into the garage, she smelled chlorine and the odor intensified when she entered the house. According to the medical examiner's testimony, Sydney's death was ruled a homicide, and the cause of death was asphyxiation. Toxicology reports indicated that Sydney had antidepressants in her system. The court learned that in addition to the missing organs, the part of Sydney's body that was not found was her upper left arm, the part just above the elbow and below the shoulder. Prosecutors had demanded the death penalty for both criminals, and the case would be retried if the sentence was unjust. But Aubrey, once again, denied involvement in the occult and pleaded guilty only to improperly burying the remains. At one point during Aubrey's trial, he shouted that Bailey had nothing to do with Sydney's death. "Bailey is innocent, damn you all." He then slashed his throat 3 times with a razor blade. He survived and was remanded into custody until he made a full recovery. After that, he did not attend court for several weeks. The next time he entered the courtroom was during the defense phase and only when he was scheduled to testify. When he was brought into court, he smirked and told the judge, "I'll be good." It is unusual for a defendant to testify at his own trial. Usually, defense attorneys advise the defendant not to testify because it may cause more problems for him on cross-examination. Some reveal too much, some can't answer questions straightforwardly, and some are hostile to attorneys asking questions, which creates a bad impression for jurors. But this was not unusual in Aubrey's case, as he had many interactions with police after his arrest. He had given the police his version of events, and at trial, he wanted to change his story. Therefore, the court needed to hear his new version of events. He decided to skip the rest of the trial and only returned for the last hearing with his horrible scars clearly visible when he testified in his defense. Aubrey Trail took the stand and shocked his attorneys by admitting that he had previously lied to authorities and his own legal team about the death of Sydney Loofe. In a new version of the testimony he gave, he admitted that they met with Sydney in March 2017 and he paid her to participate in his illegal activities because she needed the money. He said they did not keep in touch, but in November 2017, Bailey wanted to rekindle the relationship and she contacted Sydney again. Sydney needed money and Aubrey said that's why he was in Menards that day, November 15th. He offered her $5,000 to be part of his antique gang. The three of them ended up engaging in an intimate act later that night, and Sydney accidentally choked to death because of the extension cord they used in their games. "I don't know if Sydney had a seizure or something, but that's when she stopped breathing," said Aubrey. He told the court that there was no ritual involved in cutting up Sydney's body, and all the talk of witches, vampires, and blood-sucking was simply not true. He confessed that he only dismembered her because he couldn't put her body in the car. He said he panicked and dumped her body in a Clay County field as soon as dawn broke on the morning of November 16th. When asked why he didn't seek help if her death was accidental, he said no one would believe him. Aubrey admitted to disposing of Sydney's body, but claimed her death was accidental when they used an extension cord during their games. At Bailey's trial, she admitted to nothing. In fact, her attorneys argued that she was also victimized by Aubrey. Her attorney told the court that when she met Aubrey, she was a vulnerable young woman. At the time, she was living alone, working as a waitress in Princeton, Missouri. The defense argued that Bailey had nothing to do with either Sydney's death or the disposition of her remains, but that again proved to be false. The cell phone that Bailey used to access her Tinder account was used near where Sydney's body parts were found, and it was through a detailed analysis of her phone and location records that the police were able to find all of Sydney's remains. The court also learned that it was Bailey who contacted Sydney and arranged to meet her. She was the one who drove to Sydney's duplex to pick her up on the evening of November 15th. The prosecution told the court that Bailey derived satisfaction from discussing acts of cruelty, and she enjoyed talking about torture with Aubrey. Evidence was presented at trial proving a planned crime. On the day Sydney was killed, Aubrey and Bailey were together at a store where they bought tools, including a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter from Home Depot. Around noon that day, Bailey sent Sydney a text message asking how her day was going. Phone records and surveillance footage show that Bailey was in the Menards parking lot with Aubrey when she sent that text message on Tinder. And although Sydney worked at Menards, it appears she was unaware that Bailey was there. A few hours later, Bailey sent Sydney another message on Tinder, alerting her that she was at her apartment and ready to pick her up soon. Phone records indicate that instead of going on a date, as Sydney believed, they went to the apartment where Bailey and Aubrey lived. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, argued that as to Bailey, the evidence showed that Bailey was guilty of purchasing bleach and garbage bags to use to dispose of Sydney's body, and as such, she could be charged with aiding and abetting the improper disposal of human remains. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell was sentenced to life in prison. The Loofe family had been seeking justice for 3 years, mourning and longing for their Sydney, and they awaited a judgment that gave them comfort. On July 11, 2019, it took a jury less than 3 hours to find Aubrey Trail guilty of premeditated conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and improper burial of human remains. The 3-judge panel called his crime cold and calculated. In a second phase of the trial to determine whether he should be executed, county prosecutors kept their promise and secured the death penalty for Aubrey Trail. Thus, on June 9, 2021, Aubrey Trail was executed by lethal injection. The con man, accused of a brutal crime against Nebraska woman Sydney Loofe, allegedly convinced members of his cult that he was a flying, mind-reading vampire with a coven of a dozen witches who he claimed would get their powers by killing people. But thankfully, in real-life stories, justice prevails, and in our story, the trial brought the monster to the end of his trail in our world. Many years ago, scientists believed that religion would soon disappear and people would live in a benign, rational world. But religion has not disappeared. Moreover, the majority of the world's population remains religious to this day. Kurds are an Indo-European ethnic group, the 4th largest nation in the Middle East, and the largest nation in the region without a state of its own. The vast majority of Kurds are Muslims. Religion sets a person certain rules of behavior, makes them sacred, so people are afraid to break them. But today, we will learn the story of one family, where the rules of religion were distorted in favor of their own immoral beliefs. On January 26, 2006, a young man, Rahmat Suleimani, went to the police station and reported his beloved girlfriend Banaz missing. The man became concerned about her welfare after he had been unable to contact her for a week. The police did not take the missing report seriously as the man had no family ties with the missing woman, but they were forced to check the information and go to the address of residence. When the police visited the missing woman's home, they found nothing to confirm Rahmat's words about the disappearance. Her parents behaved calmly and did not express any obvious concern as if their daughter was really missing. Moreover, the family claimed that Banaz had not been home much lately and insisted that she was not missing, but had probably left and was probably at a friend's house. The police were satisfied with this explanation, but Rahmat persisted, harassing the police with daily visits to the station and forcing them to take search measures. He would not give up. The man was desperately searching for his beloved Banaz. Banaz Mahmad was born on December 16, 1985, in Iraq. They were a traditional Iraqi Kurdish family with strict religious beliefs. They lived in the rural tribal area of Kaladiza in Iraqi Kurdistan. Mahmoud Babakir Mahmud and his wife Beya had a son Bahman and 5 daughters, Beza, Behal, Hayman, Jaband, and Banaz. It was a typical Iraqi family with strong views on the role of women. In 1995, when Banaz was 10 years old, her family fled to the UK. The move had no impact on the family's views. Remaining deeply religious and traditionally influenced, the Mahmuds Sr. were not about to change their way of life even in a liberated European country. They shunned modern notions and views and lived in their religious community. Following the traditions of the community, at the age of 17, Banaz was forcibly married to a man who was 10 years older. He had flown in from Iraq shortly before the wedding, spoke no English at all, and lacked even basic literacy. She had met her future husband only 3 times before the wedding, once on her father's property. A girl with brown eyes, long dark hair, and a kind smile, she submitted to tradition and moved into the home of a strange, alien, and cruel man. From the first days Banaz crossed the threshold of her new home, her husband set about raising her. Moral abuse, beatings, and physical violence became a daily occurrence in the girl's life. Banaz, who had lived half her life in the UK and had seen how modern people live, did not want to put up with cruelty and tyranny in her family. She made attempts to leave her husband many times, returning to her father's house, but her family forced her to return. Despite the disgusting attitude, divorce was out of the question, as it was considered a disgrace for the entire Mahmad family. Unable to find support from her relatives, Banaz went to the police twice, but even there, she was virtually abandoned to the mercy of fate, without even bothering to question her husband about his wife's injuries. In July 2005, after 2 agonizing years of marriage, Banaz ran away from her tyrant husband's house and returned to her parents' home. This was the first link in the chain of events that led to Banaz Mahmad's disappearance. After her separation from her husband, Banaz felt as if she was breathing again. She met a man named Rahmat Suleimani. The bright, pretty 19-year-old girl fell in love with the man. Rahmat was charmed by Banaz's beauty and modesty. They liked each other very much, but had to keep the beginning of their relationship a secret. Having exchanged telephone numbers, the lovers allowed themselves to correspond only twice a day, early in the morning and late in the evening. Rahmat was different from the men in Banaz's entourage. Calm, judicious, and polite, Rahmat treated the girl very reverently and tenderly and won her heart at once. Within a short time, the couple was already dreaming of a wedding and a happy family life. They even came up with names for their future children. These fantasies filled Banaz with happiness and kept her afloat, not allowing her to break under the pressure of hatred and aggression, which was spewed at her by her family, who never accepted the departure of her husband. In early October 2005, while walking down the street, Banaz noticed the same car following her and someone following her. From their appearance, She realized that they were Kurdish diaspora people assigned by her father. The girl, who knew the foundations of her family, became very scared for her safety. On October 10, 2005, Banaz went to the police again. During a 2-hour interview, she told the detective on duty in detail about her life with her husband, the injuries she had received from him, her family's resentment, and the surveillance that had begun. She shared with local police that she had been repeatedly beaten by her tyrant husband, and during one of the assaults, she nearly had a tooth knocked out because she publicly called her husband by his first name. She brought to the attention of the police several times that she seriously feared for her safety and even her life. But unfortunately, Banaz's statement went into the back of the desk, and detectives didn't even bother to interview her family and husband and verify the accuracy of the information. Again, Banaz's statement is not taken properly. She promises to contact the police again if she feels she is in danger. For about 2 months, Banaz and Rahmat met secretly and went undetected. But in early December 2005, when they met near a London subway station, they were spotted by people from the clan. Information about another disgrace was immediately reported to the girl's father. That same evening, a council consisting of all male relatives gathered at the Mahmad family home. During a heated discussion of Banaz's actions, which they considered inappropriate, her uncle Ari Mahmad announced that to restore the family's honor, Banaz should be killed. She overheard this conversation. In December 2005, Banaz went to the police again and detailed that she had been under surveillance for months and that the day before she had learned that they wanted to take her life. She made a list of 5 members of her own family who were to carry out the massacre, but the law enforcers again did not take her words seriously. Soon it turns out that it was a big mistake, the consequence of which will be the disappearance of Banaz. And to learn about her fate, detectives will have to wade through a web of lies, cruelty, and ignorance. 2 weeks later, Banaz's father tricks her into going to a relative's house, promising to discuss her divorce. When she arrived, Bubakir Mahmad made her drink brandy and left her alone in a room with the TV on. Casually turning around, she sees her father putting on rubber gloves and reaching for a rope. Realizing that she was about to be taken out of her life, Banaz rushed to the front door, but the door was locked. In order to get out, she had to break a window, the shards of which cut her hands. The girl managed to get to a nearby cafe where she fainted. The paramedics who arrived at the scene took her to the hospital where they called the police. When Banaz regained consciousness, she called Rahmat and asked him to come. After being discharged from the hospital, Banaz went to live with Rahmat Suleimani. They welcomed the beginning of 2006 together and were quite happy, but by mid-January, the Mahmad family furiously began urging Banaz to return home to mend their relationship with her and discuss her marriage to Rahmat. Banaz believed her mom and dad and agreed to go back to her father's house. She believed that in case her father attacked her, her mother would protect her from harm. As insurance, Banaz visited the police station again, writing a full statement and the names of people who might harm her. The young woman was fearful, but still returned to her family and parents' home. On January 22, 2006, in the street, 3 men attempted to grab Rahmat and force him into a car. Suleimani was able to fight back and report the incident to the police. 2 days later, he and Banaz were to appear at the station to testify, but Banaz never showed up. All attempts by Rahmat to contact her were unsuccessful, as Banaz Mahmad disappeared after returning to her parents' house. Rahmat, who had been in constant contact with her, was very worried and filed a missing persons report with the police. Numerous appeals to the police eventually bore fruit. The case of Banaz Mahmad's disappearance came to the attention of the Homicide and Serious Crime Directorate, and Chief Inspector Caroline Good was appointed to lead the investigation. The first version of the disappearance was that Banaz was being held in a house in the diaspora. To search for the woman, Inspector Caroline Good organized a large-scale search of properties associated with the Mahmad family. The suspects, Banaz's father and uncle, as well as her ex-husband, were called in for questioning. Searches have begun for 3 other men on the list Banaz provided to police in December 2005: Omar Hussein, Muhammad Ali, and Mohammed Ham. All of them were Banaz's cousins. When police searched the forest and tried to question her family, doors were slammed in their faces and the family was unable to help investigate her disappearance. Police found no pictures of her at the family home, and according to Caroline Good, officers were outraged by the complete indifference from her family. Then 30 people came to the attention of Caroline Good. All of them were arrested and interrogated. During searches from the persons involved in the case, were seized more than 20 vehicles and 300 cell phones. Absolutely all those questioned tried in one way or another to slow down the investigation, giving completely contradictory testimony about Banaz's whereabouts. Some lied about seeing her after her disappearance. Others, including Banaz's mother, simply refused to talk to the police, and some claimed she was a fugitive. Realizing that none of them would cooperate voluntarily, Caroline Good obtained permission to install listening devices in the cell of those arrested. At the time, Banaz's father and uncle, as well as Mohammed Hama, remained behind bars. The other 2 men on the list managed to flee to Iraq. When the detectives received the first results of the wiretap, they were horrified. Not only did all 3 arrested men have no regrets, they literally savored the details of Banaz's death. From their conversations, it became clear that in the early morning hours of January 23rd, the Mahmad family deliberately left their home, letting Ali, Hussein, and Hama inside. There they attacked Banaz and subjected her to beatings and violence for 2 hours. At the end of the torture, Hama tightened a cord around her neck and strangled her. As he recounted the last moments of Banaz's life, Hama could not contain his laughter. But it was the accusation of her cousin, Mohammed Hama, after he admitted to being there when Ramat was threatened, that became the turning point. While Hama was held in cells awaiting trial, his phone conversations were secretly recorded. Caroline Good, with a new dose of horror, listened to the recordings, in which the suspect proudly described the details of the massacre of a relative. They congratulated each other on how courageous they were. Hama shared in detail what they had done to Banaz. She was vomiting and scared but didn't utter a sound. He then wrapped the rope around her neck 3 times so tightly that it burrowed under the young woman's skin. He excitedly continued to speak as he placed his feet on her back and pulled and tugged on the rope. Banaz clung to life until her last breath. It took the criminals more than half an hour for her to die. Caroline Good and the detectives who had seen much could not hold back tears as they realized the horror that innocent Banaz had endured. At the time of Banaz's abuse, her cousin, 30-year-old Dana Amin, was in the house and helped the perpetrators push Banaz's body into a suitcase. Ari Mahmoud dragged him out of the house to a waiting auto nearby. Hama added that a police car drove by, but its crew did not pay attention to the suitcase, which had hair and an elbow sticking out of it. The very people who were supposed to protect her from harm plotted her murder, strangled her with a shoelace, stuffed her body into a suitcase. The perpetrators then took the gruesome luggage outside London, with scraps of conversation mentioning a derelict house with a garden in Birmingham. Caroline Good matched the information she received with the movement data of the arrestees' phones and determined the search area. Given the vastness of the area, the work could take a long time, but to help the investigation again came to the aid of the criminals themselves, who turned out to be quite talkative and literally reveled in the act of retribution. During the conversation, one of them suddenly asked the accomplices if they had put the freezer back in its place. Now Good knew exactly what she had to look for. A police helicopter was dispatched to search, and while repeatedly circling the area, it spotted a house whose backyard was littered with a pile of trash. Among the black garbage bags, a white oblong object that looked very much like a freezer stood out as a bright spot. A close inspection of the suspicious house on the ground confirmed the hunch. Setting aside the heavy equipment, the police officers began digging. In shifts they dug, But when the depth of the hole reached their shoulders, the policemen were ready to give up, all except Caroline Good. She clearly remembered the words of Mohammed Hamma, who had cheerfully expressed in front of relatives that he had buried her so deep that they would only be able to find her with the help of an informer. The inspector convinced everyone to extend the search for one more day, and late in the evening of April 28, 2006, the suitcase was found. Banaz's remains were in extremely poor condition, so only dental records and DNA samples could be used to identify her. Her body, folded into a fetal position and hidden in a suitcase, was buried under a freezer in the garden of a house in Birmingham. On May 1, 2006, the suspects were charged. They were all convinced that they had done exactly the right thing and showed no remorse. Mohammed Hamma smugly declared that the case would never go to trial because he was carrying out an act of retaliation. Caroline Good did have to face a new wave of opposition organized by the Kurdish diaspora. After the discovery of Banaz's remains, the police received a flood of those wishing to provide the criminals with alibis, all of whom claimed that on the day of the alleged death of the woman, the suspects were in public and could not have committed such a crime. In total, the case involved 50 people involved in one way or another in Banaz's death. Caroline Good later recalled those events this way: "I felt nothing but anger, disgust, and contempt for these men. 50 men had actually participated in the murder of one woman, and they were proud of their masculinity." In early March 2007, London's Central Criminal Court began hearing cases against Banaz Mahmad, Ari Mahmad, and Mohammed Ham. Prosecutor Victor Temple, during the trial, described the crime as a cold-blooded and heartless execution that was ordered by the victim's father and uncle. In June 2007, a jury unanimously found all three guilty of the charges and not deserving of leniency. The father was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years, the uncle received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 23 years, and cousin Mohammed Hamma also received life imprisonment, but with a minimum term of 17 years. Delivering the verdict, Judge Brian Barker said, "In order to restore your so-called family honor, you have decided that she must die and her memory must be erased. This is a barbaric and heartless crime. What honor is there in a father putting his status in society above the life of his own flesh and blood?" But what could these words mean to the ruthless criminals who had long carefully planned to rid themselves of the fictitious disgrace? 4 months after the trio's conviction, the London police were notified that Muhammad Ali had been arrested for a crime against a boy in Iraq. He had taken his life. The leadership of Scotland Yard had to make a lot of efforts for his extradition because previously Iraq never agreed to such measures and did not extradite its citizens. But the British managed to get their way, and in June 2009, Ali was extradited to the United Kingdom. Omar Hussein, the last of the 5 perpetrators, was hiding in the Iraqi countryside, trying not to be seen by the public. In December 2009, during an argument with one of his brothers, he was shot in the leg and had to seek medical attention. He was arrested at the hospital by the police who were called, and after his discharge, they began preparing him for extradition. Initially, Hussein claimed that he had not been in London in 2005, and therefore he could not be involved in Banaz's death. However, this was contradicted by UK Social Security records, according to which he was receiving refugee benefits at the time without delay. In March 2010, Hussein was extradited. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. Dana Amin, who was in the house at the time of Banaz's murder, was sentenced to 8 years in prison for helping to dispose of the victim's body and obstructing justice. Banaz's recorded interview at the police station at one of her addresses proved her family's guilt. She once handed over a letter to a South London police station in which she gave the names of men she said were ready to kill her and her boyfriend Rahmat, with whom she had been seen kissing. The people she refers to and names were members of her family and the wider Iraqi Kurdish community, enraged by Banaz's decision to divorce a man who acted as if she was a dirty shoe to be worn whenever they wanted. She tried to leave him several times, but returned to try again, at the insistence of her family. The indifference of the police in this case, which cost the life of a young woman, has led to a significant change in the way such honor cases are handled today. Following the death of Banaz Mahmad, an inquiry into police misconduct was launched. An independent commission prosecuted 9 police officers for their inadequate response to allegations made by Banaz. 7 of them received reprimands and 2 were dismissed. Worth highlighting in this case is the tenacious team of Caroline Good, who was able not only to find Banaz's body, but also to secure the conviction of her father and uncle, and to bring back the escaped criminals from Iraq. Unfortunately, this would not bring the marvelous Banaz back to life, nor would it change the fact that the people on Earth who were the worst for her were her relatives, who by basic instinct should be her most important protectors. Banaz was buried in the Merton and Sutton Joint Cemetery in Morden. A memorial service for Banaz was held on June 26, 2007 at the Morden Auditorium, followed by a granite memorial headstone at her grave. Her family did not attend either service. Few people, including Ramat Suleimani, Caroline Good, and Banaz's 2 sisters, came to honor the memory of the unfortunate woman. The memorial was paid for by law enforcement officials working on the Banaz case and the Women's Rights Organization. Ramat Suleimani, who remained in the UK under the Witness Protection Program, never recovered from the death of Banaz. He wrote a letter of condolence to his deceased beloved, telling her that she was the love of his life. No, she was just the whole world to him. In May 2016, 10 years after the crime, he hanged himself. This marked his 3rd attempt to end his life. There is little evidence of the extent of the problem with the police, as the law is not required to record honor crimes. The Association for the Protection of Women's Rights in Iran and Kurdistan reported that police recorded more than 2,800 cases of honor-based violence in 2010. However, an organization set up to support victims of honor crimes and forced marriages said that more than half of the 600 calls they received each month, though unattended due to insufficient evidence. The UN estimates there were 5,000 honor killings worldwide in 2000, the worst form of censure against women who are perceived to have dishonored a family or community. While most cases are in South Asia or the Middle East, and in predominantly Muslim communities, cases such as that of 19-year-old Banaz Mahmad have highlighted tensions in immigrant communities trying to adjust to changing lifestyles. Some groups suggest that thousands of honor crimes go unnoticed in minority communities in Britain. Hundreds more women are taken abroad where they are forced into marriage or seriously harmed when their changed outlook on life puts them in conflict with their traditional male communities. Banaz Mahmud Bakabir Aga, a young woman of Kurdish descent, died on January 23, 2006, for the honor of her family. Her older sister, Bahal, urged other women in the same situation as her and her sister not to be afraid to seek help before it was too late. Even today, she continues to fear for her life, lives at a secret address, and never goes outside without a long black veil that covers her entire body and face except for her eyes. After all, even running away or living a secret life takes place in constant fear of being found, and from Banaz's story, it is obvious that there simply could not be a happy ending. Oriental women probably absorb submission and dependence on men with their mother's milk, accepting their will over and over again, whatever it may be. The Metropolitan Police team responsible for the investigation and for finding Banaz's body and filing a case against those involved in her murder has won an award for their work in detective investigation. Chief Inspector Carolyn Good was awarded the Royal Police Medal for her work in leading the investigation. The videotape, which had long gone unnoticed by the public for 7 years, has become crucial evidence for investigators after warnings about the dangers faced by the young woman went largely unheeded. A camera set up in the corner of a police interrogation room captured the young woman's nervousness as she brushes her hair away from her face and begins to tell her grim story. Banaz Mahmad quietly and in detail describes the violence and oppression at the hands of her abusive husband. She tells of intimidation by men on the street whom she recognizes, Then, finally, she warns of her impending death because of the dishonor she has brought upon her family. "Until now, they follow me," Miss Mahmad says in ragged English with a strong Iraqi accent, for she has lived in the Kurdish region of northern Iraq. "This is the main reason I came to the police station. In the future, at any time, if something happens to me, it will be them." Then the camera turns off, the lights go out, and total darkness sets in. In the spring of 1999, the community of Southport in the United Kingdom was split into two camps. The media and television were filled with numerous interviews with Mitchell Key, a man who, though unremarkable at first, had become a true folk hero. His sudden popularity was sparked by a scandal, the mysterious disappearance of his wife, Lindsay Wilson. One day, she left home without a trace, leaving behind 2 young children. Her distraught husband appeared worried and abandoned, pleading for her to reconsider and return. Along the way, he shared details of their marital life, occasionally speaking unfavorably about his spouse. He believed her behavior was driven by a desire for a free and extravagant lifestyle. Mitchell mentioned seeing his former beloved driving around town in an expensive car, although she just passed by. Most likely, the grief-stricken mother had left her children for a wealthy fiancé. Despite the image portrayed on TV and reality, he was enjoying a bachelor's life. As a result, one segment of the population sympathized with the lonely man, offering him attention and support. The other doubted him and suspected him of a horrendous crime. While Mitchell enjoyed widespread attention, law enforcement continued to search for the missing woman. His persona did not inspire trust, and there were complications in the case. According to Lindsay's relatives and friends, the couple's relationship was different from what her husband claimed. Everyone who knew her considered her a faithful wife and caring mother. Therefore, they were convinced something terrible must have happened to Lindsay. Otherwise, she would have made contact long ago. Suspicion was fueled by Mitchell's words during a famous talk show. When the host asked if he had ended his wife's life, his guest said he would not respond to such an indecent question, then paused and added, "Wait and find out." What was the exemplary husband and father implying? Perhaps he knew more than he shared, or was he so confident in his innocence that he was just waiting for everything to fall into place? Answers to these and other questions are forthcoming. Stockholm Syndrome. This is a shocking story about the terrible consequences of Stockholm Syndrome. The term refers to the traumatic bond between an aggressor and a victim, resulting in the victims sympathizing with their aggressor and often defending and justifying their actions. A decade ago, this phenomenon was examined through the lens of the relationship between a criminal and a hostage. However, today it has become widely recognized in the context of domestic relationships, explaining the behavior of a spouse enduring physical and emotional abuse from their partner. Typically, the wife adopts the role of the victim and the husband the tyrant. In most cases, domestic Stockholm Syndrome arises among individuals with a sacrificial mindset, attracting narcissistic characters whom they wish to heal and empower. And to ensure their tormentors do not feel alone, they are ready to share their pain. Let's not delve too deeply into psychology. The essence remains the same. Often, those who become victims of abuse are kind-hearted and empathetic people. Lindsay Wilson was one of them, a young woman who wanted to love and be loved. Her primary mistake was that she failed to recognize the object of her adoration in time. And as time passed, she struggled to escape from their codependent relationship. Lindsay's story. At 17, Lindsay discovered she was pregnant. Raised in a caring, large family, she hadn't imagined becoming a mother so early. She wasn't unprepared emotionally, but the fact that her boyfriend, with whom she'd been since she was 13, fled as soon as he learned about the impending fatherhood both upset and scared her. Lindsay knew all too well the physical and financial demands of motherhood. The Wilson family, though loving and close-knit, had often faced financial challenges. To provide for their children, her parents worked tirelessly. Therefore, when Lindsay met Mitchell Quee 5 months into her pregnancy, she considered it a gift of fate. Mitchell, a 20-year-old, acted like a true gentleman, being attentive and caring. Most importantly, her delicate condition did not deter him. Mitchell assured her he had fallen in love with Lindsay at first sight and wanted to spend his life with her and raise the child as his own. At that time, he was earning well and even started working extra hours so his beloved would want for nothing. The young couple's parents were shocked when they announced their decision to marry. They felt the 5-week-old relationship hadn't withstood the test of time and circumstances, and thus couldn't genuinely celebrate for them. The only thing Lindsay's relatives noted was that her former cheerfulness and good health had returned. At the same time, the new boyfriend seemed overly sweet to them, even cloyingly polite. Ultimately, no one interfered with their marriage, keeping their doubts to themselves. Red flag. The wedding took place in August 1995 within a close family circle. The majority of the guests were from the bride's side. The groom's side was represented by no more than 5 people: his parents, a brother, and 2 friends. During the celebration, Lindsay was ecstatic, believing she had won the lottery in life. However, the uneasy premonitions of Lindsay's relatives grew heavier when, by the end of the evening, the newlyweds had a dispute. The conflict unfolded before everyone's eyes. Something displeased Mitchell, and he started to shout loudly. It was unlikely that the reason was significant or appropriate for such a reaction. During the argument, he grabbed his new wife by the hand and started shaking her, which looked more than odd and threatening. Lindsay tried to calm him down. When the emotions subsided, the man apologized to everyone and later made light of the incident, emphasizing that it was just nerves due to the holiday bustle. At that moment, the girl did not give due attention to the situation and quickly forgot about it. However, in reality, it became one of the red flags in their toxic relationship. Diligent specialist. On February 5, 1999, a social worker officially reported Lindsay Key missing, expressing concern over being unable to reach her client. Lindsay had sought psychological support in a short period of their life together due to recurring incidents of domestic violence, and had bravely reported the situation at home. After her disclosure, the social worker had been monitoring the young family. She informed the police that she had been unable to contact Mrs. Key for several weeks. Every time she visited the home, Lindsay's husband would answer the door, and he was also the first to answer any phone calls. The dedicated worker mentioned that she repeatedly asked to speak directly to Lindsay, but received evasive excuses. During her visits, she consistently left her contact details, yet Lindsay never called back. The social worker found this situation unsafe and requested a welfare check. Law enforcement responded to the report and visited the address, but were also unable to speak with Lindsay. Her husband Mitchell explained that he had not seen his wife at home for a long time, but did not consider her missing. According to him, on Christmas Eve, Lindsay had gone to a party with a friend and returned home early in the morning, somewhat intoxicated. They had an argument afterwards. Lindsay then packed her belongings and left without saying goodbye to the children. He claimed she left him for another man and no longer wanted any contact. Search efforts. The search for Lindsay began. During conversations with her relatives, officers learned that she was last seen by her family on December 11th, appearing in high spirits and looking well, and her behavior was normal. Her family had grown accustomed to her troubled marriage. Lindsay's mother also reported that she had tried multiple times to reach her daughter on December 24th to arrange a visit to give Christmas gifts to the grandchildren. Unable to reach Lindsay, she decided to visit in person. That day, Mitchell answered the door with the children and told her that his wife had left with friends and accused her of infidelity. However, Mrs. Wilson had long learned to take her son-in-law's words with a grain of salt. After giving the gifts to the children, she left. Detectives found it strange that no one had been concerned about the young woman's well-being for 2 months. However, there was an explanation. Everyone knew that Mitchell restricted his wife's interactions with the outside world, even with close relatives. They had previously experienced difficulty communicating with her. Therefore, it was plausible for Lindsay to drop out of sight for a while. Nonetheless, this did not mean they were not concerned about her. The news alarmed them. Everyone asserted that she did not drink and led a modest lifestyle. Moreover, her husband had forbidden her all contact with the outside world, not to mention meetings with friends and acquaintances. Inconsistencies, everything Mr. Key told the police contradicted his character profile, arousing investigators' suspicions. It seemed unlikely that Mitchell could simply let his wife go, and that Lindsay would leave her children with a tyrannical husband. However, the situation demanded a thorough investigation. To this end, the police spoke with all of Lindsay's acquaintances and tried to find anyone who had seen her after the family gathering. They also questioned neighbors and requested surveillance footage from the residential complex where the couple lived and its surroundings. Unfortunately, all footage had been deleted. By the time Lindsay's disappearance was noted, some time had elapsed. However, another date was discovered when she was last seen in person. On December 15th, she was at the local post office, sending several letters and postcards as usual. Her older sister also admitted that they met that day. Lindsay had visited despite Mitchell's disapproval. The sisters had tea and a brief conversation, after which Lindsay saw her guest out. On the way, she slipped a note into her sister's hand and asked her to read it later. The sister put the note in her purse and in the whirlwind of days, forgot about it. Regrettably, the older sister couldn't find it later, and its contents remain unknown. After that day, no one saw Lindsay again. Over several months, investigators tried to cling to any information. They began to suspect that she was no longer alive, as she had not been in contact for so long. They couldn't charge Mitchell without sufficient grounds and evidence. However, the more they learned about the couple's life history, the stronger their suspicions grew. Marriage. Shortly after their wedding, Mitchell and Lindsay decided to move away from their parents. They rented an apartment in Southport. Sometime later, Lindsay gave birth to a daughter named Robin. The only shadow over the joy of the new baby was her stepfather's volatile temper. After moving, the young wife fully experienced her husband's unstable moods. One moment he could be joking and laughing, the next he became unbalanced and aggressive. Trying to maintain a fragile peace at home, she didn't realize how completely she had submitted to his will. He controlled every step she took and caused a scene whenever she failed to hear the phone or answer a call. However, loud arguments were often followed by passionate reconciliations. Mitchell would kneel, beg for forgiveness, and profess his love. It seemed for a while that peace had returned to the family. But then, the cycle would start again. Conflict, reconciliation, repetition. Lindsay began to lose recognition of the man she loved. She often told her relatives about what was happening. They advised her to return home and end her suffering. But it was hard for the young woman to admit her mistake. In one interview, the Wilsons mentioned that she always lived with thoughts of the past. Each time, her husband assured her he would change and everything would be fine. As a loving wife, she wanted to believe him and waited for him to return to his former self, gentle and caring. Meanwhile, Mitchell increasingly tightened his grip and control. He forbade his wife to go out alone in the evenings and eventually restricted her from being anywhere without him. He was jealous of her every move, yet he himself was seen in dubious liaisons. Once, Lindsay confided to her older sister that she suspected her husband of infidelity. She told her about a woman who came to their home looking for him and was very surprised to learn he was married. That day, another argument erupted, but this time it escalated to physical violence. Gradually, physical abuse became a part of their life. To prevent his wife from complaining about him and tarnishing his reputation, the man began to limit her interactions, starting with neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, and later with her family. Despite being unhappy, Lindsay still tried to maintain contact secretly, fearing being discovered and punished. At the same time, despite the evident problems, Lindsay continued to stay with Mitchell. Along with her feelings, the comfortable life he provided was a factor. He earned well, supporting her and their child, paying the bills. She truly lacked nothing financially. Second chance. The era of living in a gilded cage came to an end for Mrs. Key when she found out she was pregnant again. At that moment, she was certain she no longer wanted more children. It's only fair to note that Mitchell was good to his stepdaughter, even loving her. However, Lindsay deemed the current circumstances unfavorable for bringing another child into the world and decided to terminate the pregnancy. When her husband learned of this, he became enraged, hurling insults and physically intimidating her. That same evening, she packed her things, took her child, and returned to her parents' home. Her family breathed a sigh of relief. There she proceeded with the pregnancy as she had planned. Over time, however, she began to miss her husband. He wouldn't leave her alone, frequently calling and begging her to come back. Mitchell tried everything to prove he had changed. Eventually, he managed to convince Lindsay. Initially, everything went well, and it seemed as if their old feelings had returned. The Keys were expecting another child. This peace lasted for 6 months until Mitchell had a severe anger outburst. Fortunately, he did not direct his rage at his pregnant wife, but took it out on the apartment. He smashed everything he could see, destroyed furniture, ripped doors off their hinges, and even stained the walls with blood and food remnants. He threw the television out of the window and smashed the car parked outside. The landlord demanded not only compensation for the damage and repairs, but also that they vacate the apartment. This situation worsened the family's financial position, requiring additional expenses. As a result, the couple had to take out a large loan and move to a more modest apartment. You can't run from yourself. In October 1997, their son Jack was born. The father adored the boy. However, the relationship between the spouses became increasingly tense. Throughout their married life, Mitchell frequently left home, sometimes for a few days, sometimes for a week, often over trivial or fabricated reasons. Lindsay had grown accustomed to her husband's behavior. Yet, when he abandoned her again, she filed for divorce and returned to her parents' home. Apparently, she realized she couldn't cope with the separation on her own. Therefore, she reached out to a local charity that assists women in difficult life situations. They helped her find subsidized housing in another city. Lindsay feared that Mitchell would discover her new address or phone number, so she took measures to distance herself from him. After he made several threats, she even obtained a restraining order from law enforcement. With the help of a therapist, she began to rebuild her life. She started a journal where she documented her life and experiences, intending to leave it to her children so they would never repeat her mistakes. The entries confirmed the relatives' claims about the difficult dynamics within the family. Despite her precautions, Mitchell discovered her phone number and incessantly called, demanding to see his son. With her newfound freedom, Lindsay felt lonely, and after a short time, she could not resist his persistence. They began communicating and seeing each other again, and eventually moved back in together. The mother of two was ashamed to admit her own weakness, so she told no one about it. Nevertheless, the secret came out. Relatives and friends were shocked and disappointed by the reunion with the tyrant. They couldn't understand why she had let him back into her life. Mitchell remained unpopular with Lindsay's relatives. They, too, wanted nothing to do with him. Ultimately, their communication nearly ceased. Despite all efforts, Lindsay repeatedly returned to the abusive relationship. Thus, her circle saw no point in trying to save her anymore, accepted the situation, and stepped back. However, this time, her decision proved to be fatal. Villain in disguise. At the outset of the investigation into Lindsay's disappearance, Mr. Key was initially helpful in the search efforts. However, as the case gained media attention, his focus shifted dramatically. He turned his misfortune into a public spectacle, becoming a media figure in the process. As Mitchell invited more journalists into his home, his abundant media appearances began to seem less genuine, with viewers often noting a smirk on his face. Lindsay's parents considered their son-in-law to be involved in their daughter's disappearance, and detectives also viewed him as the prime suspect. Yet, the lack of direct evidence tied their hands. Searches were conducted not just at the couple's home, but throughout the area. After a provocative question during a televised interview, the antagonist became even more brazen, even declaring that the time would come when his wife's family would have to apologize for their suspicions. On the eve of the holiday season, Mr. Key sent a postcard to the lead investigator on the case. Attached to it was a pack of hair dye. Instead of a festive greeting, Mitchell wrote, "I hope this covers your gray and gives you a bit more confidence," mocking the detective and displaying his own arrogance. In the media, he had already played the victim of not only marital infidelity, but also of harsh treatment by authorities. To put this upstart in his place, the investigation team gave an interview. Without revealing all the details of the case, they hinted that the well-known family man was not who he claimed to be. Tarnished reputation. In February 2000, Mitchell Key found himself at the center of a scandal. It became known that he had been forging his wife's signature to receive social benefits, serving as another indirect proof of his involvement in Lindsay's disappearance and presumed demise. The investigators wanted to latch onto a financial motive. However, the suspect's popularity worked in his favor. Many supporters emerged, arguing that as a single father, he had every right to financial assistance. These circumstances hindered the detectives' ability to bring the charges they desired. Nevertheless, they managed to charge him with fraud. Mr. Quay was brought to court for the benefit fraud and was found guilty, sentenced to a month of community service. This time, Mitchell couldn't walk away unscathed. The forgery of his missing wife's signature appeared more than suspicious. The number of angry comments increased. Eventually, the man's patience snapped and he began lashing out, blaming the media for intruding into his personal life. A new beginning. The case of Lindsay Key's disappearance might have remained unsolved had it not been for a clue discovered by chance. On June 1st, 2000, a park-goer noticed his dog acting strangely near the roller coaster at a city amusement park. The animal uncovered human remains. Specialists were called to the scene, and the remains were sent for forensic examination, which revealed that they were parts of a female torso. Genetic testing confirmed they belonged to Lindsay Key, who had been missing for a long time. This breakthrough revitalized the investigation, making it clear that Lindsay had been the victim of a brutal crime. The focus now was to find the perpetrator. On June 7th, Mitchell was brought in for questioning. The detectives were determined, and after more than 36 hours of intermittent interrogation, the suspect broke down under the pressure and confessed. Dismemberment murder. On December 15, 1998, after meeting with her sister, Lindsay informed her husband that she wanted a divorce. This time, she was resolute. According to Key, this news infuriated him, leading him to attack and strangle her. The incident occurred in front of their children. He then hid her lifeless body in their bedroom, stuffing the gap under the door to mask any odors. Realizing he couldn't dispose of the body alone, he enlisted the help of his brother Elliot, a butcher who he thought could assist. Elliot was initially hesitant, but was eventually persuaded by Mitchell. While the children played in the next room, they dismembered Lindsay's body and later dispersed her remains across the city. During his confession, the murderer expressed no remorse or empathy. Instead, he seemed proud of his actions, stating that without his confession, they would never have proven his guilt. The next day, he led them to the other locations where he had hidden her limbs. Sadly, her head and one hand were never recovered. The forensic comparison confirmed that the remains were indeed Lindsay's. There was no doubt about Mitchell's guilt. The final judgment. The trial of the Key brothers took place in January 2001. The court proceedings were swift and straightforward. Mitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 17 years. The court-appointed psychiatrist noted that the defendant showed all the signs of being a narcissist with sadistic tendencies. His brother Elliot received a 7-year sentence for his role in concealing the crime. Lindsay's children were taken in by her maternal grandparents, who gave them their surname. Just 3 months after the sentence was handed down, another tragedy struck the Wilson family. One of Lindsay's older brothers, unable to cope with the shock, took his own life in the attic of their family home. In his farewell note, he wrote that he saw no point in continuing in such a cruel world and wished to reunite with his sister. As of 2017, Mitchell Key has been eligible for parole. However, as of January 2023, his lawyers have been denied 3 times. The Wilsons, including the children, are concerned that the murderer might eventually be released. Consequently, they have started a petition urging that he remain incarcerated. As long as the voices of the victim's family are considered, the criminal will continue to serve his sentence. Regardless, no punishment can bring Lindsay back. In an interview, Mr. Wilson mentioned hearing rumors that his former relative had attempted to end his life. He added that he sincerely hopes the murderer will try again and succeed this time. Experience shows that most women with domestic Stockholm syndrome try to adapt to their abusers throughout their lives. Even when their families come to their aid, they continue to act against their own best interests. In such cases, only deep self-reflection and psychotherapy can help. If the victim does not come to realize the recklessness of their actions, the end of the relationship will be dire. Why was the beauty queen robbed of her life? They say beauty is a powerful force capable of saving the world, but unfortunately, it does not guarantee happiness and can sometimes lead to trouble. Beautiful girls are always the center of attention, usually with many admirers. However, renowned beauties and crowned beauty queens are not only surrounded by fans and patrons, but also by many envious people, ill-wishers, and obsessed stalkers capable of unpredictable actions. The case of the tragic demise of the young Kimberly Oliveira shocked all of South America, becoming one of the most shocking and resonant. The girl, who won several beauty contests and was a contender for the title of Miss Brazil, was brutally and treacherously deprived of life. She dreamed of fame and recognition, but they turned out to be very different from what the model had imagined. Her name indeed became widely known far beyond her native country, and people admired Kimberly's beauty and youth. At the same time, they were horrified by the terrible manner in which she ended her life in the prime of her years, and by the many heights she could have still reached. Who was Kimberly Oliveira? Kimberly Karen Mota de Oliveira was born on February 26, 1998, in the small yet cozy Brazilian town of Manacor, located in the municipality of the same name in the state of Amazonas. She was the eldest child and the only daughter in the family of Naila and Jose Oliveira, and was raised alongside her two younger brothers. The girl had Brazilian, Spanish, and Indian roots, and it can be said she won the genetic lottery. She possessed incredibly attractive looks that drew the eyes of those around her like a magnet. Kimberly had flawless skin, luxurious thick hair, a dazzling smile, and a slender feminine figure. The beauty was used to universal attention, admiration, and adoration, with her peers and adults alike comparing her to an angel. From a young age, she engaged in dance and gymnastics, loved swimming, and meticulously took care of her appearance and manners. At the same time, she excelled in school, read a lot, regularly visited the theater, and studied foreign languages. Already in her teenage years, Kimberly began participating in various beauty contests, where she won prizes and also modeled in advertisements and clothing catalogs. In high school, she firmly decided she wanted to connect her life with the modeling business, especially since her mother Naila was also a recognized beauty in her youth and won several titles, including Miss Manacor. However, Naila later married and sacrificed her modeling career for the sake of her family and raising 3 children. Kimberly realized she had outstanding physical attributes and loved to pose in front of the camera. She was featured several times in fashion magazines, participated in shows, and won the official title of the most beautiful girl in her hometown. She also reached the finals of the Miss Amazonas contest in 2017, prepared to participate in it again, and was a serious contender for the title of Miss Brazil. In case of victory, she could have gone on to prestigious contests like Miss World or Miss Universe. However, Oliveira understood well that to win at such a high level, beauty and charisma alone were not enough. Contestants there are also evaluated based on their intelligence, education, moral qualities, charitable activities, and so on. Additionally, contenders for the beauty queen crown must not have criminal records, legal issues, or photo shoots in the nude style. Kimberly actively managed her social media accounts, where she promoted a healthy lifestyle, sports, and proper nutrition. She also detailed her life, posted shots from various photo shoots, and simply interacted with her growing number of followers. By 2019, her page on a popular social network had several tens of thousands of followers. The model aimed to be a role model, inspiring and motivating her followers. At 19, she decided to pursue higher education and aimed to enter medical school to become a dentist. To achieve this, Kimberly moved to Manaus, the capital and largest metropolis of the state of Amazonas, where her maternal uncle Henry lived. After successfully passing the necessary exams and enrolling in the university, she moved from a quiet, cozy place to a huge, bustling city. settling in her relative's house. Oliveira quickly adapted to her new environment, made friends, and successfully combined her studies with sports, advertising shoots, and participation in various projects. Persistent and cunning admirer. In her free time from studies and photo shoots, Kimberly usually spent time with her friends, often hanging out in various places as a large group. In the fall of 2019, Kimberly and her close friend were enjoying themselves at a popular club when a handsome young man named Rafael Fernandez Rodriguez approached them. He wanted to get to know Oliveira and offered to buy her a cocktail. However, the model, accustomed to the heightened attention towards her and knowing how to handle such situations, politely declined, noting that she was not alone and didn't need anything. Rafael simply apologized for the disturbance and left, but the girl didn't yet know that this entire scene was premeditated and orchestrated by the stranger. The fact was that the man had been following the young model's social media page for about a year, closely observing her, but never attempting to make contact until that day. He knew well the places the beauty frequented and decided to act, pretending to see her for the first time and merely wanting to meet her. At that time, Rodriguez was 31 years old, recently divorced, and obsessed with the idea of meeting and starting a romance with Kimberly. Learning from posts and stories that the model had moved to Manaus, he also moved to the city, where, having a legal education, he quickly found a high-paying job in corporate law and rented a spacious apartment in an elite residential complex. Then, he began implementing his plan, closely monitoring Oliveira, waiting for the right moment to approach her. After the unsuccessful attempt to meet at the nightclub, Rafael decided to step out of the shadows and started sending the girl private messages on social media, inviting her on a date. He also actively commented on and liked all the posts the model shared on her profile. For several months, she ignored the persistent follower, paying him no special attention as she regularly encountered similar situations, and this guy didn't particularly stand out. Rodriguez then changed his tactics, adding Kimberly's classmates, friends, and even relatives to his friends list, trying to befriend them and gain their trust. This plan succeeded, and he managed to obtain her phone number from one of her close acquaintances. The obsessed stalker then began messaging her in instant messengers, suggesting they meet. The man studied the object of his admiration well, knowing what she liked, where she went, what music she listened to, and so on. He started attending outdoor training sessions occasionally conducted by Oliveira herself, and only there did he manage to catch her attention. They finally talked, and after that, they began regularly calling and messaging each other on social networks. Rafael managed to pique the girl's interest as he was well prepared. Despite a significant age difference of almost 10 years, an easygoing friendship developed between the young people. The man cautiously approached, trying to court and please the girl beautifully without scaring her off, but also not letting her forget about him. His tactic worked perfectly, and in March 2020, Kimberly and Rafael declared themselves a couple and started officially dating. Obsessed owner. The attractive and romantic guy who did everything to win the beauty's affection revealed his true colors as soon as they began dating. He started literally monitoring his beloved's every move, wanting to know everything about where she went, whom she communicated with, who messaged her, and so on. Initially, the girl even found it amusing, as no one had ever restricted or controlled her before. However, the situation worsened daily, and Rafael's behavior became increasingly intrusive and aggressive. He now decided which photos Kimberly could post on social media, when and if she could go live, whom to respond to and whom to block. Soon she grew tired of this, attempted to set personal boundaries the guy couldn't cross, and they had a serious argument. Rodriguez had to apologize, and to make amends, he invited the girl to a luxurious restaurant and gave her a huge bouquet of flowers. He repeated this after each quarrel to avoid losing Oliveira, whom he had pursued so long and persistently. The man gave her expensive gifts, organized romantic dates at trendy spots, and said he would never leave her. Kimberly increasingly complained to her friends about her boyfriend, saying she couldn't take a step without his permission and approval. Raphael forbade her from talking to guys even at the university, took her phone without permission, checked calls and messages, and then created scenes. Sometimes, he got so furious that the girl feared for her safety. Her friends confirmed this was abnormal, advised her to have a serious talk with the guy, and if nothing changed, to leave him before it was too late. Kimberly also understood she didn't want to live like this, knowing a brilliant modeling career, diploma defense, world travels, photo shoots for fashion magazines, fame, and recognition awaited her. She didn't want to give it all up for uncertain relations with an unstable and obsessed owner who restricted, controlled, and sought to possess her like an object. Final decision. By early May 2020, after 2 exhausting months of relationship, Kimberly decided to break up with Raphael, but was unsure how to do it without triggering his anger. She waited for the right moment to announce the breakup, but it was no longer possible to delay. On May 10th, Brazil celebrated Mother's Day, a holiday Kimberly always spent with her mom. However, due to restrictions imposed by the raging COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, she couldn't travel to her hometown to congratulate her mother. Instead, Kimberly posted a photo of them together with a touching caption and words of gratitude. At the time, Nayla was in the hospital undergoing treatment after being diagnosed with cancer. After posting, Kimberly went for a run in the park with a few friends, including Raphael. Everyone who saw the couple that day claimed they weren't arguing, were talking nicely, and no one except her close friend knew that the model planned to break up with her boyfriend that evening and had already made her decision. At noon, Kimberly called her uncle and told him she would spend the day with her best friend Gabriella, but would return home to sleep. Later, she called Henry again, asking him not to lock the front door because she forgot her keys and promised to be back by midnight. Henry did as asked and went to bed, fully trusting his niece. In the evening, while at her friend's place, Kimberly rehearsed what she planned to tell her boyfriend. She carefully chose words to avoid hurting his feelings and to prevent any outbursts of anger, although it was very difficult. Finally, she seemed to have found the right delicate phrases and was ready for the important conversation. Around 9 in the evening, Raphael arrived at her friend's house in his brand new white Audi. Kimberly walked out to him with a smile, waved goodbye to Gabriella, and got into the passenger seat next to the driver. No one saw the girl alive again. Mysterious disappearance of the couple. On the morning of May 11th, when Henry woke up, he realized his niece hadn't come home and became very worried. Kimberly always told him when she would return and informed him if she planned to stay over at a friend's place. He tried to contact her, but her phone was off. He then called Gabriella, who said that Kimberly left with her boyfriend and hadn't been in touch since. Henry called Raphael, but he didn't answer, which was very strange. It soon became clear that the girl didn't show up for her university classes, something she had never done before. By noon, convinced that his niece was missing and no one had seen her, Henry went to the police to file a report about the disappearance of the girl and her boyfriend. However, the authorities just laughed at him, saying Oliveira and her boyfriend were adults and could go wherever they wanted without telling anyone. Henry and a few friends of the missing girl began searching on their own. They first went to Raphael's apartment, but no one answered the door. His car was also missing from the parking spot. Everything indicated that the couple had indeed gone somewhere together, but Kimberly's close ones knew she would never disappear without telling anyone. By evening, Henry called his sister Nayla and told her what had happened. He didn't want to worry his relative, who was battling a severe illness, but he couldn't wait any longer since she had also been trying to contact her daughter all day and suspected something was wrong. He tried to reassure her that nothing bad could have happened to Kimberly since she didn't keep bad company, had no harmful habits, and avoided trouble. Kimberly's friends began massively posting her photos on their social media pages and various groups, asking for any information about the girls or her boyfriend, Raphael's whereabouts. Since the young model was quite a popular figure, news of her disappearance went viral, and thousands of followers joined the search. However, this yielded no results. Grim discovery in a locked apartment. The police only began to act on May 12th, nearly 2 days after the couple's disappearance. A search warrant was obtained for Raphael's apartment, as it might contain clues or hints about the whereabouts of the young people. But what the authorities discovered when they forced open the locked door and entered the premises shocked everyone. Kimberly was in one of the rooms, but unfortunately, there was nothing that could be done to save her. The lifeless body of the young girl lay on the bedroom floor in a large pool of her own blood, covered with a sheet. There were also several large bloodstains on the bed, and blood traces and smears on the carpets and floor coverings were found in almost every room. It was evident that the criminal had panicked, trying to cover up the evidence, but soon realized it was futile and simply fled, turning the air conditioner on full blast to slow down the body's decomposition so no one would suspect a body was in the apartment. The forensic experts found 4 stab wounds on the victim's body, 2 to the chest and 2 to the neck. The weapon used was a large kitchen knife, which lay in the next room with traces of blood and clear fingerprints of the criminal. The perpetrator didn't even try to get rid of it or wipe off the traces, but just threw it on the floor. Judging by the absence of defensive wounds or signs of a struggle on the body, the girl was most likely attacked suddenly when she least expected it. It appears the attack happened on the bed, but she was finished off on the floor with a blow to the neck, severing her carotid artery. The apartment owner was nowhere to be found, and his documents, some personal items, bank cards, and car keys were missing. The state of the rooms indicated he had left in a hurry. If Raphael was previously considered missing, he was now reclassified as the prime suspect in the brutal crime. But where to look for him, and could he have left the country by now? Hunt for the fugitive criminal. The forensic examination confirmed that the fingerprints on the crime weapon belonged to the missing Rodriguez. No traces of other people were found in the apartment. At the time of the crime, only the criminal and the victim were present, dispelling any remaining doubts about the man's guilt. Alerts about Raphael were immediately sent to police stations across the state and circulated widely on social media, noting that a dangerous criminal was being sought and requesting any information about his whereabouts. Additionally, a search was launched for the white Audi that the suspect drove. Detectives understood that every minute counted, so they checked all reports from vigilant citizens. On May 13th, news came that a white Audi was found crashed in a ditch by the roadside in the neighboring state of Caracaraí. The car, as it turned out, belonged to the suspect. Surveillance footage showed Raphael driving at high speed. It seems he lost control. The car veered off the road and overturned. However, it was unknown how badly the driver was injured and where he went. There was speculation that he might have hitchhiked to the Venezuelan border and fled there. Failed attempt to cross the border. It was soon learned that the injured man in the accident was indeed picked up by a passing car and taken to a nearby town. There, Rodriguez took a taxi to the nearest bank, withdrew almost all the money from his account, and then took the same taxi to the border town of Boa Vista. From there, he attempted to cross the border into Venezuela on foot to escape justice. Fortunately, his attempt to leave the country was unsuccessful. Due to restrictions related to the worsening COVID-19 situation, the man was not allowed to pass. He could have returned to Boa Vista, a city of nearly 300,000 people, and tried to blend in, but detectives found out that the suspect preferred to hide in the wooded area, waiting for things to quiet down. After a couple of days of searching, the fugitive was found deep in the forest, in a small hut almost camouflaged by the surrounding environment. However, the arrest didn't go smoothly. The police were suddenly attacked by men wielding machetes, whom Rodriguez had hired from the local population for personal protection, paying them generously in cash. Fortunately, there was no bloodshed, as the authorities showed their badges and explained they were there to apprehend a dangerous criminal. They informed the bodyguards that aiding the criminal could result in serious legal consequences for them as well. Raphael's version. By the time the main suspect was arrested, The police already had all the evidence of his guilt, so denying it was pointless. Surveillance footage showed Kimberly getting into his car, arriving at his place, going up to his apartment, and then Rodriguez leaving alone a few hours later, fleeing the scene. Interestingly, in all the videos, the couple appeared calm, chatting pleasantly and smiling. Rafael left the apartment calmly, clearly not feeling fear, remorse, or guilt. Under the weight of evidence, the suspect admitted his guilt, but presented a rather strange version of the events of that day. According to him, he and his beloved decided to have a romantic evening and went to his apartment for that purpose, where they had intimate moments. Afterward, Kimberly went to take a shower, and Rafael decided to check her phone, finding out she had been chatting with several guys on social media. He wanted to confront her directly about it, but first went to the kitchen and took a large knife, hiding it under a pillow. He claimed he did not intend to harm her, but only wanted to scare her if she tried to deceive him. When Oliveira came out of the shower and lay on the bed, Rafael immediately started questioning her about whom she was communicating with. The girl just smiled and said she wasn't talking to any men. This infuriated Rodriguez. He realized his beloved was lying and mocking him. He grabbed the knife and quickly inflicted 2 blows to her heart. The victim didn't have time to understand or resist, but slipped off the bed onto the floor, where the attacker delivered 2 more fatal blows to her neck. Realizing what he had done, Rafael tried to cover up the traces, but quickly understood it was futile. He couldn't remove the body from the apartment unnoticed, and the suspicion would still fall on him. So, he simply covered the body with a sheet and turned the air conditioner on full blast to keep the room as cold as possible, slowing the decomposition process. Witness testimonies. Kimberly's best friend, Gabriella, testified as a witness, providing a completely different version of events. According to her, Kimberly had finally decided to break up with her aggressive and mentally unstable boyfriend that evening. She had spent a long time carefully preparing what to say, knowing that one wrong word could send Rafael into a rage. Gabriella insisted that Kimberly would not have been intimate with a man she planned to leave, and certainly wouldn't have joked about messaging other guys, knowing his reactions were always unpredictable. Another witness was the defendant's ex-wife, who confirmed that Rodriguez was a cruel person who suffered from uncontrollable fits of anger, affecting everyone around him. His aggression was the primary reason for their divorce. Rafael's only supporter was his mother, Fatima, who claimed that he was a good person and never meant harm to anyone. She blamed Kimberly, her ex-daughter-in-law, and everyone else for driving her boy to sin. Lenient sentence and its aftermath. Rodriguez's father did not live to see the trial. Realizing what kind of monster he had raised, the elderly man chose to end his life by stepping in front of a train. His widow insisted it was an accident, saying her husband felt unwell and accidentally fell onto the tracks. However, surveillance footage clearly showed otherwise. The defendant's legal team pushed the narrative of his insanity, repeatedly delaying the case by requesting new psychiatric evaluations. Ultimately, Rafael was deemed capable of standing trial for his heinous act. The trial began in October 2021, nearly a year and a half after the brutal crime. Despite the overwhelming evidence of his guilt, Rafael received a surprisingly lenient sentence of only 14 years in prison, later reduced by another year. This outcome was due to the defense's successful argument that their client had acted in a fit of rage when he committed the crime. As a result, instead of life imprisonment, he received a significantly lighter punishment. On the day of the sentencing, October 28th, Kimberly's mother, Millet Oliveira, passed away after a long battle with cancer. She had followed every court session via video call from her hospital bed, where she was in very poor condition. Just a few hours after the verdict was announced, her heart stopped. The Oliveira family lost 2 beloved members in less than a year and a half. First their cherished sister and daughter, then their loving wife and mother. Meanwhile, Rodriguez's mother vowed to wait for her son to be released from prison, as he was the only close family she had left after her husband's death. The Marlene Oaks case. Who owns the skull found in the woods? A crime is considered perfect when it has achieved its main goal and the perpetrator has not been punished or has not been suspected at all. However, these days, thanks to the latest technology and scientific approach, it is becoming increasingly difficult to commit such a thing. Moreover, even old, unsolved cases that seemed perfect in the past are being successfully solved decades later. In 1980, an auto mechanic named William Bill Major also thought he had committed the perfect crime that would never be solved. Hardly a man could have guessed that, more than 2 decades later, he will still have to stand trial and get a well-deserved sentence. And the initiator of the new investigation was his own daughter, whom he deprived of a mother in early childhood. And now, let's study the whole story in detail, deconstruct this perfect crime and imminent punishment. To be fair, it should be noted that this high-profile and very cruel case of the disappearance of a young mother, Marlene Oaks, could have been solved back in the distant 80s because the victim herself, who had a premonition of her imminent death, left many clues to the police, to which the law enforcers for some reason did not pay due attention. Marlene Oaks, the early years. A girl named Helen Marlene Oaks was born in 1954, the 7th of December, in the small town of Martinsville, in the state of Virginia, and was the middle of 3 children of the spouses Lorraine and William Oaks. She was raised with an older brother and a younger sister. Their family lived quite modestly, but the parents always tried to provide their children with everything they needed and bring them up worthy people. By the way, our today's heroine from childhood preferred to use her middle name, Marlene, which she liked much more than Helen. She was petite and very cute blonde, with brown eyes and a charming smile, so it was not surprising that she had a lot of admirers from an early age. At the age of 16, barely out of school, the girl, wanting to soon start an independent life and escape from parental care, hurried to tie herself to the bonds of marriage. Her chosen one was a man named William Major, who was 10 years older than her, but the couple in love, the difference in age did not confuse. The chosen one worked as an auto mechanic and seemed to the girl a serious and reliable man. Unhappy family life. Soon after the couple officially legalized their relationship, they settled in a trailer park on the outskirts of a small country town of Verona, located in Boone County, Kentucky. In 1972, the couple had their first common heir, a son, to whom they decided to give the name Donald. At that time, Marlene was barely 17 years old, and her husband was already 27 years old. 4 years later, the couple had a younger daughter, Lalana. The couple still lived in a small trailer on the grounds of the trailer park. Marlene was a homemaker, raising their children and making their modest home comfortable, while Bill worked at a service station fixing cars. He was good at what he did and was, so to speak, a jack of all trades. He had every chance to build a brilliant career, to open his own business, but the man did not particularly strive for anything. Money spouses barely enough for the essentials, but the head of the family, every time he managed to earn a little more, as a rule, spent it all on drink. Later, his addictions were joined by the use of illegal substances. At the same time, Bill was a sociable person, sociable and seemed very friendly to others. All these qualities helped him a lot in his work. People who turned to his workshop for help often came back again and also recommended Majors as a good specialist to their friends. However, at home, Bill became a completely different person, rude, selfish, and cruel. Former feelings that had once linked their lives together with Marlene seemed to have evaporated without a trace, left only misunderstanding, resentment, and irritation. The couple often quarreled, and sometimes their heated arguments escalated into violence. Bill was not a caring husband and loving father, and over time he became more and more like a domestic tyrant. A new neighbor and a secret lover. In 1978, a young Canadian named Glenn St. Hiller was passing through the town of Verona, and his truck suddenly broke down. On the advice of the locals, he went to the workshop of Bill Major, who willingly undertook to repair the vehicle. The stranger was traveling from Ohio to Texas. He didn't know anyone in the area, and the only hotel in the suburbs was closed, and he simply didn't know where to stay. When Glenn complained to the auto mechanic about the situation he found himself in, Bill promised to help, and quickly found him a place to stay in a trailer park and invited him over for dinner. The guest was literally enchanted by Marlene's beauty, her kindness and friendliness. The young woman cooked a delicious meal, willingly and with interest kept the conversation, seemed very nice and open. 2 weeks later, Glenn visited Verona again to thank Bill for his help, and after another month he decided to move here for a while. The man settled in the same suburban trailer park and took a job in Bill's shop, becoming Bill's subordinate. Also, the new neighbor began to show interest in Marlene, and in every possible way sought meetings with her. The situation in the family major has long been very tense. The spouses only quarreled, shouted at each other, exchanged insults, and sometimes even fought. For Marlene, communication with kind and courteous Glenn became a real outlet. They quickly became close, and soon became lovers. The couple spent all their free time together, trying to hide from prying eyes, but in a quiet suburb where everyone knows each other, gossip spreads quickly. Soon the rumors reached Bill, but the cheating husband didn't seem particularly upset about it. Moreover, he even strangely encouraged their relationship, and he seemed to have lost interest in his young wife. The explanation for this behavior was soon found, and it turned out to be truly monstrous. Major, as it turned out, had an unhealthy interest in his own children, and soon he began to realize his secret fantasies. The ugly truth and the beginning of the divorce proceedings. Soon, Marlene noticed some oddities and changes in the behavior of 8-year-old Donald. The boy became withdrawn, nervous, did not sleep well, and was afraid to be alone with his father. When his mother decided to have a frank talk with him, the child told her the terrible things his father did to him and asked her to protect him. Marlene was horrified by her son's confessions and realized that it was simply impossible to continue living like this. She had long planned to divorce Bill, get sole custody of the children, and move with Glenn and the kids to her native Virginia, closer to her parents. Her lover also suggested that she do this, and now there was a real reason to hurry up with the divorce and move. Marlene told her husband everything she had learned from her son about his unacceptable behavior, declared her intention to divorce, and also threatened to report him to the police. The scandal quickly escalated into manhandling, and Bill hit his wife hard in the face several times. From that moment, the spouses were literally in a state of war. Marlene initiated the beginning of the divorce process, but separated from her husband. She could not yet because of the children, because she wanted to achieve officially sole custody of them. Her husband beat her almost daily, insulted her, and threatened to kill her. He promised to kill her and said that he would make sure that no one would ever find the body and that he would stay with the children. The unhappy young woman simply did not know what to do. She secretly kept a personal diary in which she wrote down everything Bill said to her, how he threatened to kill her and cover his tracks. Moreover, several times, being in a state of alcoholic intoxication, Bill described in detail how he would get rid of his wife, dismembered her, and hid the remains in different places. The most important role in hiding the crime he assigned to the removal of all the teeth, so that the body would not be identified by dental records. It is noteworthy that all these terrible things Major and Colors described not only his wife, but also some of his friends, who, however, did not take his words seriously. Meanwhile, the situation was escalating, and the neighbors who lived in the trailer park became daily witnesses of the stormy marital strife. Marlene runs away with no kids and no lover. Everyone knew that Marlene had filed for divorce and was planning to move to another state with Glenn and the children. No one judged Marlene. Everyone knew how difficult and unhealthy the situation was in her family. But relatives and neighbors expected that everything would be resolved in a peaceful and civilized way. On October 11, 1980, around noon, the spouses once again loudly scandalized, but soon all quieted down. Toward nightfall, an agitated and angry Bill led the children to one of the neighboring trailers and knocked. He said that his wife had run off with her lover, leaving his son and daughter behind, and asked him to watch the kids until tomorrow while he tried to find Marlene and bring her home. The neighbors agreed to shelter the children for the night and immediately thought that the young woman had run away with Glenn, but wondered how a loving and caring mother could abandon her adored offspring. What was everyone's bewilderment when Glenn came out of his trailer in the morning, and to all the questions about the escape, he only stared at those around him incomprehensibly. It turned out that he had not seen his beloved since yesterday, and in general was not aware that she disappeared somewhere. Then Glenn himself went to Bill to clarify the situation, but the furious husband only shouted that his wife found another lover and lost her head. However, Glenn did not believe his words, because he knew for sure that no other man at Marlene was not, and she under no circumstances would not abandon the children. A day later, Major himself went to the police, where he reported the disappearance of his wife, outlining his version of events. He added that their family car had also disappeared, which he believed supported the runaway version. But the police also found the whole story very strange. They had the impression that Bill was making it up as he went along, sometimes contradicting himself and confusing himself in elementary clarifying questions. Search for the missing woman, interrogation of witnesses. The police decided to begin the investigation of this case with a survey of neighbors and relatives of the couple, as well as studying the circumstances of the disappearance of the young woman. All unanimously spoke about the difficult relationship between the spouses, but claimed that Marlene would never have left Donald and Lalana because she loved them more than life. There were also those who heard about Bill's creepy stories about how he would kill his wife and dispose of the body. This prompted the man's arrest and interrogation, but he himself claimed that it was just drunken chatter, and he didn't really intend to harm his spouse. The next oddity was that a search of the house revealed the missing woman's passport, wallet with cash and driver's license, as well as all of her personal belongings. It seemed as if she had just gotten into a car and left without her belongings, money, or documents. But where to? Marlene's relatives could not answer this question, but her sister mentioned about their last disturbing phone conversation, that Oaks was afraid for her life, and kept a diary in which she wrote down everything that happened to her. The information about the diary was of great interest to the detectives, but nothing similar was found when they searched the trailer. A few days later, Glenn showed up at the police station with the diary. He explained that Marlene had left her notes for him to keep, in case something happened to her, or she disappeared somewhere without a trace. When the woman did go missing, he waited a few days and then, realizing she wasn't coming back, took the notebook to the station. The pages contained some truly gruesome entries, including beatings, humiliation, and threats. There was also a detailed description of how Bill had promised to kill his wife. In addition, Marlene wrote about the fact that the husband showed a sick interest in children. In this regard, it was decided to talk to Marlene's son, but he did not provide any valuable information, practically did not answer questions, and only constantly asked to let him go home. For some reason, the detectives did not pay attention to the fact that the boy was scared and simply could not truthfully answer questions. His father had interviewed him beforehand, and Donald was afraid to say anything unnecessary for fear of his parents' anger. They decided not to traumatize 4-year-old Lalana and did not interrogate her. For the next few weeks, police officers scoured the neighborhood looking for any leads or clues. Marlene and her car were wanted statewide, but the young woman and the vehicle seemed to have vanished into thin air. There was no reason to believe she was dead or murdered. The investigation has reached a dead end. The move looks like an escape. Despite the fact that relatives and neighbors testified against Bill, and the man himself was repeatedly called in for questioning, no grounds for his arrest were ever found. Neither a body nor any conclusive evidence that Marlene might have been seriously injured was found, and she was still missing. Major began to quickly sell off his property, explaining that he was going to move closer to his parents because it is very difficult for him to manage 2 children after the escape of his wife. Among other things, he sold his weapons, namely a rifle, a shotgun, and a couple of pistols. His strange behavior resembled not a preparation for moving, but an ordinary escape. To the children, Bill kept telling them that their mother never loved them, so she abandoned them. He He said that Marlene was an alcoholic, that she had tons of lovers who were more important to her than her family. Bill diligently turned his son and daughter against their own mother, trying to make them hate the most dear person. It should be noted that he succeeded quite well, because Donald and Lalana were still small and blindly believed their father. Soon Bill and his children moved to the state of Rhode Island, where his parents lived. There they purchased a trailer and settled down for many years. But after the disappearance of Marlene, in the life of Donald and Lalana began a real black streak. Their father brutally beat them, abused them, humiliated them, and did even more terrible things. At first, it was mostly Donald who was subjected to these tortures, but as Lalana grew older, the bitter fate did not spare her. About a year later, the man had a new lover named Pauline, with whom they began to live together, but could not legalize their relationship because Major was still married to the missing Marlene. Nevertheless, the couple had a child together, and for some time the family lived a quiet life, until one day Pauline herself did not witness what Bill was doing with his own son. She immediately went to the police, telling them everything, took her child, and left. Bill was eventually arrested, and his children went to live with their maternal grandparents in Virginia. A gruesome find in the woods. About a year and a half after Marlene's mysterious disappearance, a hunter came across a frightening sight in a wooded area near a Verona trailer park. He saw that his dog had started digging in the ground, and something resembling a fragment of a human skull emerged. The man immediately reported it to the police, and the arriving experts confirmed his hunch. It was indeed a badly damaged skull. The found remains were immediately sent to forensic experts for a detailed study, and the conclusions of experts were really frightening. The skull had a missing lower jaw and not a single tooth. There were 2 bullet holes in it, and the shots were made at point-blank range. And also the experts revealed on the bones chopped marks from a large knife or axe, which probably separated the head from the body. It was impossible to determine unequivocally to whom this skull belonged, but judging from the size and condition of the bones, it was assumed that it was a young woman, under 30 years of age. Naturally, the story of Marlene's disappearance immediately came to mind. The entire area within a radius of several kilometers was thoroughly combed, but no other remains or belongings were found, and so the discovery was dubbed Jane Doe, which means unknown, and the search was suspended. A new investigation 20 years later. When Donald and Lalana moved into their grandparents' house, their lives gradually got better. Most of all, they were afraid of the day when their father would be released. But Bill, after his release, was not interested in his grown-up offspring at all, and did not even try to get in touch with them. For a long time, Lalana did not talk about her mother at all, because she was angry at her for leaving them with a tyrant father. But one day, during a frank conversation with her grandmother, Lalana asked her why her mother had fallen out of love with her and her brother and left the family. To what the old woman replied that she did not believe in the story of the escape and believes that it was her spouse has dealt with her. At this point, the girl's world turned upside down. She looked at the situation in a completely different way and realized that the grandmother was right. The girl decided to conduct her own investigation and uncover the mystery of her mother's disappearance. The first thing Lalana did was to keep a notebook in which she wrote down everything she could remember from her childhood, as well as everything her older brother knew and remembered. In 1998, when the girl was already 22 years old, she decided to go to her native Verona in order to talk to former neighbors and find out if any of them have valuable information that will help her. As it turned out, in those places still lived Glenn, who did not lose hope that one day the mystery of the disappearance of his beloved will be solved. His personal life has not developed. The man was lonely, worked at a local factory, and was constantly interested in the investigation of the case of Marlene Oaks. It was from Glenn Lalana learned about the diary that her mother kept, which she gave him for safekeeping before her disappearance. This diary was later added to the case file and lost somewhere on the shelves of the police archives. Lalana was able to get permission to see her mother's writings and was literally shocked by the contents of the diary. Not only did her mother know she was about to die, but she also gave the name of her killer, the method of death, and the process of hiding the evidence. After reading the notes, the girl immediately rushed to her father, whom she had not seen for more than 10 years, in order to find out the truth. It should be noted that Bill, after his release from prison, remarried, but in 1995 he had a stroke, and since then he has been confined to a wheelchair. When he learned the reason for his daughter's visit, he only laughed in her face. Lalana begged him to tell her where he had hidden Marlene's remains so that she could give her mother a decent burial. The girl promised that she would not go to the police, and everything Bill said would remain just between them. But the father only insulted his daughter, called her crazy, and said that she would never know what happened to her mother. From her mother's diary, Lalana learned about the perfect crime her father was preparing, which included dismembering her, removing all of her teeth, and burying the remains in different places. Also, Lalana, who along with her brother was bullied by Bill as a child, found out some horrific details from her father's biography. It turned out that even before meeting their mother, Bill served time for harassment. But for some reason, this circumstance police officers passed over when entrusted Majoru custody of the children after the disappearance of their mother. In 2000, 2 decades after Marlene's disappearance, her daughter initiated a new investigation into the case, providing all the materials she had managed to collect on her own. Lalana and her brother were re-interviewed, and this time they recounted everything their father had done to them, the beatings being the least of their troubles. At the same time, Lalana learned about an unidentified skull fragment with no teeth or lower jaw that had been found in the local woods a year and a half after her mother's disappearance. She began to insist on the need for DNA testing, but at the time the procedure was extremely expensive, and government agencies refused to cover the cost. However, Lalana did not even think of giving up and organized a fund to raise money for the procedure. Relatives, neighbors, and just concerned people joined in, and eventually, by the beginning of 2001, Lalana already had the necessary amount of money to carry out the identification procedure. The analysis established the degree of the girl's kinship with the previously unidentified remains and determined that the skull fragment found did indeed belong to the missing Marlene Oaks. Then Lalana, already having the results of the examination, went to her paternal grandfather to talk to him and find out if he knows anything. The elderly man was shocked by the news and agreed to testify to the police against his own son. Bill's father said that back in 1980, his son, being in a state of alcoholic intoxication, told him that he killed his wife with 2 shots in the head, dismembered her body with a hunting knife, and buried the remains in different places at an impressive distance from each other. At the same time, he got rid of the lower jaw and teeth especially carefully. As for Marlene's car, he threw it off a cliff into the river, but the police eventually failed to find the car or its fragments. Most likely, for more than 2 decades, the turbulent mountain river either carried the vehicle far downstream or completely destroyed it, literally grinding it against sharp rocks. A trial and a just verdict. Despite the new circumstances and the evidence found, there was still no probable cause to arrest Bill. Then the police decided to go for a trick and asked Bill's father to bring his son to a frank phone conversation so that he confessed to everything. The trick succeeded, and Major, learning that his daughter seeks to resume the investigation, said that she will not succeed because he has safely hidden all the fragments of his wife's body, her car, and got rid of the instrument of crime. It was these words of Bill that became the reason for his arrest, because he actually confessed to everything himself. In July 2001, the man was taken into custody. After listening to the recording of the telephone conversation, as well as learning about the identification of the skull, he confessed to what he had done. However, he blamed everything on his late wife, saying that she simply drove him to scandals, cheating, as well as threats to take his children and forbid him to see them. At the trial, Bill told his version of the story, saying that he and his wife had a fight in the car and she started threatening him with a gun, but he grabbed the gun from her and allegedly, accidentally shot her twice in the head, except that the shots were fired into the back of her head at point-blank range, which looked like a premeditated crime, but not self-defense. Bill's trial did not begin until the summer of 2003, 23 years after his crime. At the hearing, the 59-year-old defendant was brought in a wheelchair. He himself behaved calmly and was confident that he would be able to avoid punishment. The lawyer hired by him insisted that this crime was the result of self-defense, and the stories of Lalana and Donald about harassment are not true. But despite the defense's best efforts, the court found Major guilty of the brutal, premeditated murder of Marlene Oaks. The man was sentenced to life in prison, which came as a complete surprise to him. In December 2016, Bill tried to apply for parole but was denied. A year later, he died in prison after suffering a second stroke. The mysterious disappearance of Maya Millet. In January 2021, the city of Chula Vista, California, had not been quiet for days on end. During lunch, office workers shared city news with each other, and by late afternoon they consolidated what they'd heard over a family dinner. "Did you hear that?" they said. "A young woman, a mother of 3, has mysteriously disappeared." And each of them voiced their own versions of what had happened, but none of them wanted to be in her shoes personally. 40-year-old Maya Millet, a Filipino-American woman, disappeared from her own home on January 7, 2021. Outdoor surveillance cameras recorded Maya returning home around 5 p.m. The woman was not seen after that. The relatives of the missing woman, who were knocked down, stunned with grief, handed out leaflets with Maya's photos and hung posters around the city. Their concern was understandable. January 10th was the birthday of my eldest daughter. She would never for anything in the world would not miss this holiday, they said in one voice. As reported by the woman's relatives, the last time she got in touch with them was January 7th at 8:15 p.m. Dozens of volunteers and police officers went in search of Maya Millet. They searched the wooded area, nearby neighborhoods, creeks, and an abandoned golf course, but were unable to find anything. Larry Millet himself, the husband of the missing woman, never took part in the search for his wife. Moreover, after some time, he cut off all contact with her relatives. For a long time, the police assumed that Maya, having quarreled with her husband once again, decided to leave him. However, when she left the house, she could have been caught on the neighbor's CCTV camera, so she either did not leave the house, climbed out the window, or left the house in another way. What could be the reason for such strange behavior of a man? Maya, standing out among the others with her unusual beauty, probably had a lot of admirers, and maybe even more than one affair on the side. It is quite possible, without informing anyone, having lost her former feelings for her husband, she ran away from him, and not alone. Maybe that's why he was angry and didn't take action. Larry claimed, "I thought she was still alive because she voluntarily left our home at least twice in 2020 without saying goodbye to me, or our 3 children. We prayed for her safety and well-being. God gave Pablito and Noema Tabalanza 6 children. Maya was born as the 5th, since it was in May that the girl was born. Her parents gave her the name May. She succeeded everywhere. The purposeful character of the girl helped her in this. Thus, being in elementary school, she was in the top 5 students of her class. After the immigration of the family in March 1995 in the city of Honolulu, located in Hawaii, the girl entered the high school Retford, and there she began to show herself. She actively participated in various school and extracurricular activities, especially emphasizing the drama club and dance lessons. After graduating from high school with honors at the age of 17, Maya got a job at McDonald's, where she met her future husband, Larry Millet. A relationship developed between them. When Maya turned 19 years old, they got married. At the same time, the girl entered the University of Hawaii at Manoa, a land-grant state research university. Life was boiling for the young people. While Maya was studying at the university, her husband Larry was training in the Navy in Virginia. After a while, the couple decided to move to the city of Chula Vista, California. In order not to stop studying, Maya continued her studies at the University of San Diego. After graduating with honors, she took a job with the U.S. Navy as a civilian contract specialist. Where are those strange noises coming from? Maya thought. Am I going crazy already, and are they unreal? The phrases "I love you," "Love me," echoed through the house, slightly audible. Day and night they kept the young woman awake, haunting her in different places in the house. Maya's family didn't stop looking. They immediately hired a private detective. To maximize the attention of those who cared, the family repeatedly appealed to the public to help them in their search for her. On February 5th, 2021, the Chula Vista Police Department and the Millet family held a briefing to encourage as many people as possible to look for her. A short time later, skeletal remains were discovered in Orange County that were believed to be Maya Millet's, but this turned out not to be the case. It was then claimed that the remains belonged to a man. It was later proven that the remains were animal bones after all. On April 6, 2021, Maya's disappearance was broadcast on Good Morning America. The missing person case gained national interest in April 2021 when Maya's sister appeared on Dr. Phil's talk show to talk about the situation. Maya took all matters particularly seriously. Despite the fact that she came from a large family and loved children very much, she was in no hurry to have them. She didn't want to give birth until she and Larry had a steady, stable, high income. That's the American dream. After all, they had to provide their children with the best future imaginable. To make it happen, they had to work very hard and diligently. The right moment came in 2010. Then Maya and Larry had a daughter, Lara. In the wake of her a year later, another daughter, Milani, was born, and in 2016, the heir son, Lazarus Tristan. Maya was a great mother. She devoted all her free time to her children, giving all of herself. She attended all their school events, traveled with them in her SUV. There are some women whose children become the center of their universe. Wise, indulgent, caring. Maya was one of those women. By the end of 2020, the couple's relationship had become strained. Larry assumed that Maya had a lover. Her husband's jealousy knew no bounds, and if before she put up with these attacks, now she could barely tolerate it. Later, the DA's office would report that Maya had warned of Larry's capacity for anger. Just 2 days before his disappearance, police said, Maya texted a friend to end the marriage. "I told him I'm filing for divorce whether he likes it or not," she claimed. "I'm no longer trying to make peace for the sake of the kids." Larry controlled literally every move his wife made. At a frantic pace, the jealousy was escalating into sheer paranoia. Larry could go to her workplace at any time to make sure that Maya was not alone with another man. Larry was also pissed off by the fact that there were plenty of men on his wife's team. Larry once had the audacity to send an email to Maya's former boss, Derek Sopp, requesting that a male colleague be transferred to another division. He followed her practically around the clock, even got the kids involved in their squabbles. Larry once hid a child's cell phone in his spouse's car to track her movements. It got to the point where Larry was getting violent. He almost strangled Maya once. The couple separated, but not for long. In early 2020, Maya moved in with her brother, but rekindled her relationship with Larry after about 6 weeks. On August 12, 2020, Maya texted her brother, JR, "He never lets me be alone. He checks all my emails, messages, messengers, Facebook posts. He even checks my app on Venmo. And then what happens? He just tightens the reins harder." Although Larry wasn't initially a suspect, police have taken a keen interest in his identity. Investigators contacted Maya's relatives, who said that shortly before the disappearance, the couple had gone camping and spent the entire time they were there fighting. Maya returned from the camping trip and told her family that if anything happened to her, Larry would be involved. According to the case file, Maya's friend told police that Maya made a different statement in December 2020. "I don't think he would hurt me, but I think he would hurt the kids to get back at me." Prosecutors say the mother of 3 did not explain further what she meant at the time. When we fall in love, for better or worse, we see the object of our adoration exclusively in a rosy light. Often we project our character traits and attitude to life onto our partner without noticing the red flags, so-called in psychology behavior, that may indicate the presence of an underlying problem or a potential threat to the well-being of the partner relationship. Abusers, manipulators, narcissists, aggressors, we justify them with deficiencies of upbringing, stress, but we should look deeper. Apparently, the nature is so laid down that families were created mostly in youth, when the whole world is presented in rose-colored glasses, so to speak, for a great sometimes blind love, so that the human race did not stop. And after a while, having gained the necessary life experience, we see in a partner what was so carefully hidden from us at first glance. We think about re-educating, smoothing out all the sharp edges, to reconcile finally. But no, you can't change a grown man. It remains only not to give an outlet for his negative traits. This is the case with jealousy. If a person has certain traumatic events, paranoia is not far away. Returning to the sounds that Maya heard, one might guess that the woman had developed hallucinations amidst the stress of her family's troubles, but that was not the case. The situation took an unexpected turn. Maya remained sane, which is not the case with Larry. A police detective named Lorenzo Ruiz told the public the story of Larry's internet search, releasing screenshots of queries that included subconscious wife training and subconsciously training your wife to give pleasure. Unable to reach an amicable agreement, Larry began to influence Maya's subconscious mind by installing certain devices around the house that made this sound. Larry's cunning ruse was discovered by Maya. According to Matthew Grinley, an investigator with the San Diego County District Attorney's Office, in late 2020, Maya sent messages to Larry demanding that he stop playing such audio messages that negatively affect a person's mental health. This is a kind of influence that programs a person to perform certain actions. Maya heard these sounds every day. Maya's sister-in-law named Genesis Tabalamza later told investigators that Larry himself had independently recorded all these words and even confessed to Genesis about it. Who could have inspired Larry to do such a thing? Maybe the specifics of the job and the training he received during his service gave him the idea? The answer will shock many. The investigation found that between September 2020 and the time of Maya's disappearance, Larry sent more than 1,000 messages to various spellcasters and psychics. He purchased about 70 spell charms from them, spending more than $1,000. During a search of the home, police officers found a book titled Magical Love Spells. Larry was sending messages to similar witches and warlocks one time a day for sure. He asked for a spell to make Maya suffer some kind of physical injury that would make her unable to move around on her own, maybe become disabled, in general, to be completely dependent on her husband. Larry thought that seeing his concern at such a time, and the fact that he had not abandoned her in her hour of need, Maya would appreciate his feelings for her. After all, he is such a good man. Here's what he wrote in his messages. I would like a strong spell to bind my wife Maya Millet to me forever, to make her love me unconditionally as I love her. I hope you are able to cast a spell to cause bodily harm or maim, but not to kill. Looking at everything that was happening, at how Larry was gradually losing his mind, Maya was finally convinced of her intentions. In December 2020, Maya decided to divorce her husband. Every event in life, like actions, has an initial mechanism, a so-called trigger. Police believe that Larry's desperation to lose his beloved continued to grow by the day. On January 7th, the day authorities believe Maya contacted a divorce attorney, he was frantically trying to overturn my spouse's decision to file for divorce. I'm shaking inside, ready to snap, he wrote to one of the spellers. Earlier in the day, Maya called a divorce lawyer. By the way, attorneys also reported that Maya strategized how she would serve Larry with divorce papers because she was concerned about his reaction. She considered going somewhere else, and then suing him, and even made a contingency plan to stay in a friend's vacant apartment. But Maya didn't want to leave her children behind, prosecutors reported. She did not want the children to be with the defendant when he found out she was seeking a divorce. Perhaps Larry's extreme behavior, triggered by jealousy of his spouse, can also be blamed on mental health issues the man had, but had been dormant for a long time. Or maybe he always behaved differently than other people, just Maya and Larry did not put out of the trash. Larry's behavior was becoming more and more like that of a psychopath. Larry has a truly horrible temper, Maya wrote in a text message in June, according to the case file. In his own home, he created a small altar in the center of which he placed a joint photo with his spouse. Larry smeared the photo with his own blood and placed 4 candles around the edges. On January 23rd, police officers obtained a search warrant for the Millet family home. they found 16 firearms in the home that belonged to Larry. It was determined that 2 of the guns were in his possession illegally. 4 of the guns for which Larry had a license were missing. When asked by police officers where the weapons had disappeared to, the man explained that he had loaned them to his friend and uncle. In May 2021, Larry received a restraining order for the weapons, after which he had to surrender them to the authorities. This was justified by the fact that police found pictures of Larry's young son surrounded by guns in the house. It was possible that the children had access to it, so fearing for the possibility of them hurting themselves, the court ordered the order. The day after Maya's disappearance, at approximately 6:45 a.m., a neighbor's surveillance camera captured the Millet family's black SUV, a Lexus GX 460, driven by Larry. The man returned home at approximately 6 p.m. Where he had been all this time is not known. Another suspicious moment. The car was originally parked in such a way that the back of it was not in view of the neighbor's security cameras. As we remember from the beginning of this story, Maya's family was planning a birthday party for her oldest daughter on January 10th, 2021. So when Maya stopped answering calls and texts, one of her siblings traveled to Chula Vista to make sure everything was okay. When Maya's brother met with Larry, the latter told him that his wife had gone to one of her rooms the night before after their argument, locked herself in it, and was not talking to anyone. In the morning, Larry took his son to Solana Beach, a coastal town in San Diego County, and when he returned, Maya was still in the locked bedroom on the 2nd floor. On January 9th, Larry again told Maya's relatives the same story about the locked room, but no one believed him. The relatives demanded that Larry grant them access. When Maya's family entered the room, it was empty. Maya was nowhere to be found in the house. However, her car was parked outside the house. Only her credit card and driver's license were missing. After that, around midnight, Maya's older sister, Chris, filed a missing persons report with the police. It wasn't until January 15th, after his spouse missed his oldest daughter's 11th birthday, that Larry Millet said he was concerned about his wife's fate. In addition, on January 8th, the day after Maya disappeared, Larry did not text any of the psychics. And on January 9th, according to prosecutors, he asked a witch to lift all spells on Maya and cast spells on a man he believed Maya was having an affair with. It is clear that Maya was unlikely to have left her house, otherwise the security camera would have recorded it. On that unfortunate day, another strange thing happened. Larry and Maya's children were playing in the yard at about 10 p.m. This event did not go unnoticed by a neighbor of the Millet family. He was surprised by it, since it was late and cold outside. At 9:57 p.m., the neighbor's surveillance camera captured the sound of 9 loud bangs. Police speculated that they may well have been gunshots. After audio analysis of the video, police were unable to understand the nature of the sounds. Another coincidence that casts doubt on the man. Larry owned a huge gun collection, including a .40 caliber Smith Wesson pistol, which police were unable to locate in the house, according to court documents. Billy Little, a junior attorney working with Maya's family to investigate the case, was able to uncover one incident that occurred 15 years ago, specifically on the evening of April 30th, 1997, in San Diego's Bay Terrace neighborhood. Maya met Larry Millet in high school after he moved to Hawaii from San Diego with his family. The move may have been prompted by Larry's arrest for a 1997 juvenile gang-related assault. I have reason to believe that he, Larry, was in a gang, the attorney argued. As a juvenile, Larry was arrested for a stabbing. The victim of the attack suffered multiple stab wounds and was rushed to Mercy Hospital, where he eventually recovered. As a rule, criminal records often find their echoes in adulthood. In an interview in January 2021, Larry admitted that he did have an argument with Maya in 2020. As of February 3, 2021, Larry stopped cooperating with the police. On July 22nd, Larry was officially named a suspect. Investigators assumed that the 41-year-old man killed his wife on the night of January 7th, ate, and then disposed of her body. In interviews, Larry told the same story that Maya's relatives had heard, about the argument in the room his wife had locked herself in. By a strange coincidence, his phone was turned off for about 11 hours on January 8th. Larry didn't show up for work that same day, and no one reliably knew exactly what he was doing. It was impossible to track his whereabouts. Too bad the neighbor's video surveillance camera is a mute witness to the events that unfolded and can't talk. The camera shows Larry driving his car up to the garage in such a way that the rear of the car is not in the frame. Larry may well have known which part the camera was capturing and positioned the car in a convenient manner. During this time, he could safely carry Maya's body through the garage and then, loading it into the trunk, drive away to dispose of it. Following his arrest, the man remained in custody and was held without bail. On October 19, 2021, Larry Millet was arrested for the murder of his wife Maya based on circumstantial evidence, and the children were given legal custody to his parents. To prevent further emotional trauma, the court barred Larry from having contact with his children. But the man violated that injunction more than once. He called his relatives, who gave him the opportunity to talk on the phone with his children. In total, he made more than 100 phone calls and talked to his children for more than 9 hours. According to prosecutors, during some of the calls, Larry made disparaging comments about Maya's family or asked for news headlines to be read to him. He asked an 11-year-old girl to have her and her 10-year-old sister watch a movie called Shot Caller, an R-rated movie that contains a warning, said Deputy District Attorney Christy Bowles. Essentially, it's a story about a businessman who goes to jail. Larry suggested that children watch it to see what kind of environment he was in. As a result of the court, Larry was stripped of all phone calls except for calling his attorney. However, as early as October 2022, Larry was granted permission to communicate with his children in writing. He was still prohibited from speaking with them through personal visits and the telephone. In order for the children to continue attending their current schools in Chula Vista, they were awarded custody to their paternal grandparents on October 19, 2021. Maya's sister also wanted custody of her nephews, but was denied. Maya's family was allowed to visit the children, but they still wanted to seek full custody of them through the court. The judge ordered Larry Millet's parents to facilitate maternal visitation with the family and work to obtain mental health services for the minors. When visiting the children, relatives are prohibited from discussing any details about ongoing criminal or probate cases with the children. Fairness. The children were left in the care of the parents of their mother's alleged killer, in a town where everything reminds them of the tragedy. Maybe the court should have sided with Maya's sister after all, giving custody to her. In June 2022, Larry's lawyer filed an appeal claiming the man was incompetent to stand trial, but after a psychiatric evaluation, Larry Millet was found competent. It is unlikely that an insane man could have been aware of his actions in cleaning up his tracks. When examining Larry's seized cell phone, it was found that all the text messages he wrote to his wife had been deleted. When asked where the correspondence had gone, Larry explained that he simply wanted to free up space on his phone. That's a strange answer, because the messages don't take up that much space on the device. During the trial, it turned out that Larry had withdrawn a large amount of money from his bank account. Perhaps with the money in hand, Larry was making plans to escape, or maybe he just wanted to move to another city, starting a new life with his children. Charged with murdering his wife and illegal possession of weapons, Larry Millet's trial is scheduled to take place in 2024. However, the trial has already been postponed and moved to other dates more than once. Could it be a matter of so-called circumstantial evidence? After all, circumstantial evidence is evidence that relies on an inference that connects it to a fact. For example, fingerprints at a crime scene. Direct evidence in turn supports the truth of a statement directly, that is, without the need for any additional evidence or inference. It is easy to get confused without the necessary legal skills and experience. In any case, the situation is unfolding before our eyes, picking up its pace. One thing is constant and tragic. The once prosperous, at least in appearance, family is destroyed. The mother has disappeared and is apparently dead. The father is in prison and apparently the perpetrator of the atrocity. The 3 children are left without parental love. 3 innocent souls, traumatized for life, left to live in a society that will remind them of what happened many times over, whether in reproach or out of pity, grieving the wound. This high-profile story took place in January 2023 in the state of Pennsylvania, Limerick Township. The township, named after the first settler William Evans, is one of thousands of small and cozy towns scattered across the country. Here, a measured and quiet life flows, and it seems that nothing can disturb this harmony. In such places, the inhabitants know each other by sight, and their friendship makes many of them one family. Jennifer and Blair's friendship began while they were working together. They were once business partners, collaborating on common projects. However, even after Blair decided to become a simple chef, their bond did not lose its strength. Their friendship grew beyond business and became more than just a working relationship. Their friendship took on a special significance because of Jennifer's 8-year-old son, Noah, who has autism. Blair had always given his friend genuine support and helped her in caring for Noah. Their children were also friends. They often spent time together, and when the children's games would run late, Noah would stay overnight at the Watts house. Jennifer Brown, born in 1979, was an active and full of life woman. She was always smiling and exuded an energy that infected everyone around her. Friends and relatives often wondered how she managed to combine so many things and be active. But her true calling was motherhood. About the father of her son, Noah, nothing was known. But this situation did not overshadow their lives, but on the contrary, made Jennifer stronger, especially after Noah was diagnosed in early childhood with autism. Taking care of her young son, Jennifer became a reliable support and best friend for him. Mom and son were inseparable friends, spending a lot of time together, sharing moments of joy and supporting each other in times of need. This friendship between them evoked feelings of tenderness and admiration from all who knew their family. The people of the small town saw their closeness and adored this family for their cheerfulness and genuine kindness. Unfortunately, none of them could have anticipated what would happen to Jennifer one winter day. On January 3, 2023, she disappeared without a trace. On the morning of January 4, 2023, the local Limerick Township Police Department received a disturbing call from Antonio Blair Watts Richardson. He was deeply concerned about the disappearance of his close friend. Even though it had been less than 24 hours since he had last seen her or heard her voice, the anxiety inside him was growing by the minute. For hours now, Tony had tried unsuccessfully to contact Jennifer, but all his attempts had gone unanswered. This behavior was completely unlike her. She was active and responsible, always answering calls or messages, especially in matters concerning her son Noah. However, on this day, for some reason, the boy's mom did not meet him after school. The missing person's family and friends were well aware of what a devoted mother and caring woman she was. Therefore, the sudden disappearance caused serious alarm to all who knew her and left no one indifferent. Antonio's call to the police was the first step in a long and mysterious investigation that would soon engulf the entire city and shake it with its tragedy. Immediately after Blair reported his girlfriend missing, a massive search began. Police officers, family, and friends joined forces, hoping to find any trace that might shed light on Jennifer's disappearance. It left many questions in the air, and the main one was, what could have caused the caring mom to leave her son without any explanation? At 4 o'clock that afternoon, Officer Stephen Crawford of the Limerick Township Police Department went to the Brown family home to check on what was going on in the family home. He found that her vehicle was parked by the porch, and upon entering the home, he discovered that her keys, purse, tablet, and work cell phone were still in the house. However, the officer was unable to locate Jennifer's personal cell phone. Later, when police tried to track it down, it was discovered that the phone had been turned off at 7 a.m. on January 4th and could not be traced since then. The last location the signal came from was near Lewis Road and Ridge Pike in the town of Limerick. This was the first serious trace in the investigation and a sign that something terrible had happened to Jennifer. She was reported missing and police began investigating the case. Investigators began questioning her family, friends, and neighbors, hoping to find out if anyone had seen or heard anything at the time Jennifer disappeared. None of the young woman's loved ones or acquaintances, however, could provide any useful information. Her aunt, Diane Brem, and Jennifer's friends, Tiffany Barron and Blair Watts, claimed that there was no way the young mother would have left alone. as she could not leave her son alone. This was a woman full of devotion and love for her child. All efforts made by the authorities and volunteers were fruitless. They could not find any traces or clues as to where Jennifer might have been. Her loved ones appealed to the public through the media for any information on the possible whereabouts of the young woman. A reward was set up, but that too was inconclusive. The case of Jennifer Brown's mysterious disappearance was just beginning to develop, leaving investigators and family with questions and anxious expectations. The police investigation began with a close look at all the circumstances of that day, and her close friend Blair Watts, who was the last person to see Jennifer alive that day, came to the forefront. It was an ordinary January day. Jennifer and Blair sat in the cozy living room discussing life, future plans, and their children. Their children often played together, and Jennifer had asked her friend for help to pick up her son Noah from school so they could spend the evening together. This was a common practice for friends. Blair, being the loyal friend that he was, agreed, and after finishing their conversation, immediately headed to the school to pick up Noah. The next day, however, something strange happened. At school, Noah behaved unusually and caused his teachers concern. They noticed that the boy had missed 2 doses of his medication that helped him manage his condition due to his illness. This was highly unusual, as Jennifer had always been a devoted mother, never neglecting her son's caregiving responsibilities and always being in touch with teachers if anything happened at school. The school staff tried to find out where his mom was and was told by Noah that she had gone to the grocery store and had not returned. This caused even more concern, as this behavior of a sensitive woman was very uncharacteristic. She never left her son alone. At this time, Jennifer's friend, Blair Watts, also tried unsuccessfully to contact her. After not hearing back or contacting Jennifer, Blair decided to see if she would show up to pick up her son from the bus stop. However, when the woman never showed up and concern grew by the minute, Blair had no choice but to go to the police and report his friend missing. As time passed, no new information about the possible whereabouts of the missing woman had emerged since the investigation began. Hopes for her return were fading with each passing day. It seemed that Jennifer had disappeared without a trace and might never be found. But on January 18th, 2 weeks after her disappearance was reported, 2 employees working in a warehouse near Roseford, in the neighboring municipality of Limerick Township, discovered something strange. They came out of the building to get coffee and saw what appeared to be a freshly dug hole in front of them. When they went closer to inspect it, they were horrified to find the body of a woman buried in a shallow grave. The workers immediately notified the police, who immediately arrived at the burial site. Upon examining the body, police identified the young woman they had been searching for the past 2 weeks as Jennifer Brown. The sheriff called her family and informed them that the missing woman's body had been found partially buried near a warehouse in Roseford. An autopsy revealed that Jennifer's death was clearly violent. Death was due to asphyxiation, and she had 3 broken ribs. This indicated that Jennifer had probably struggled with her killer, who had beaten her to subdue her. Now the nature of the investigation changed. The missing person case was reclassified as a murder case. Police once again began interviewing everyone who was close to the murdered woman, including her family and friends. However, these interviews yielded no new information about the case, and the police had no suspects. It seemed as if the investigation was about to wind down and the police had no one to follow up on. But later, when detectives least expected it, they got a lead from an unexpected source. After the news of Jennifer's disappearance and murder was published, the police called for anyone who had any information that could help unravel this mysterious story to come forward to investigators. Noah's teacher came to that call. She recalled a case that at first glance seemed unimportant to her, but after Jennifer's death was recognized, raised serious suspicions. The teacher said that Noah shared with her an important detail about that terrible day, January 4th, when Jennifer disappeared. Little Noah told her that when Blair Watts picked him up from the bus stop on January 3rd, the boy noticed that among Blair's belongings was his mom's personal cell phone. Noah recognized it immediately, as the lock screen displayed his own childhood photo. That moment turned out to be key in the investigation into the young woman's murder. Previously, investigators had already assumed that Jennifer's killer carried away her cell phone. Now Blair Watts came into the spotlight, becoming the main suspect. The police began to scrutinize the relationship between Jennifer and Blair, and mysterious details began to come out, shocking even experienced investigators. Jennifer and Tony's friendship seemed solid and long-standing. They spent a lot of time together, knew each other well, and their families interacted with each other. But once the business side of their relationship came to light, it turned out there was a dark history lurking beneath the mask of friendship. Blair Watts was the owner of a restaurant called Birdie's Kitchen, which unfortunately fell into disrepair and closed in early 2022. After this, Blair turned to his friend, asking her for help. In August 2022, Jennifer decided to invest in her friend's business to help him revive Birdie's Kitchen in a new location. They entered into a contract that stipulated that Jennifer would provide regular financial contributions to keep the restaurant going every 6 weeks or so in order to rebuild Birdie's Kitchen and get it back on the market. According to Blair, from August through January, Jennifer turned over approximately $36,000 to him to rebuild the business. They also agreed that she would hand him another $9,000, according to their agreement. Blair found a new location for the restaurant and was to deposit some of the money as rent, enter into a contract, and reopen Birdie's Kitchen in January 2023. However, it turned out that the money provided for the investment was spent on Blair's personal needs. The property owners with whom he had entered into the agreement drew attention to his failure to fulfill his financial obligations. Therefore, on December 26, 2022, they terminated the agreement with him. Blair found himself in a desperate situation. He lost not only his money, but also the opportunity to open his restaurant. The police began to suspect that in desperation he had decided to commit a terrible crime to save his business. Looking closely at the financial transaction history on Jennifer's iPad, investigators discovered 2 unauthorized transfers of $17,000 to Birdie's Kitchen on January 3rd. The funds were not included in the formal agreement between Brown and Blair. In addition, the transfers failed several times and were only successful after the 2-factor authentication system on the iPad was disabled, which increasingly pointed to Jennifer's friend's involvement in her murder. Police then interviewed the owners of the property, who had terminated their lease with Blair. It turned out that on January 4th, the very day Blair reported Jennifer missing, he appeared before them, saying he had the funds to enter into a lease agreement. Investigators were convinced that Blair was the killer. However, realizing that he would never admit his guilt, they needed to gather irrefutable evidence. Their first step was to interview Blair's wife, Tiara Taylor, and find out where Blair was the day Jennifer disappeared. Tiara told detectives that on January 3rd, Blair visited the Brown family around 1 p.m. and did not return home until 4:30 a.m., when he picked up Noah from the bus stop. Tiara also claimed that her husband came home only briefly and then left again around 5 p.m. and did not return until late that night. This time frame became a key point. Further investigation revealed that Blair had spent the night with Tatiana Garrett, his mistress, and did not meet up with her until around 8 p.m. This meant that between 5 and 8 p.m., Blair had no alibi. Based on the available evidence, detectives put together an alleged chronology of the murder. According to their version, on January 3rd, Blair went to Jennifer's house while Noah was at school at about 1 p.m. and allegedly killed her. He then made 2 transfers of funds from the murdered woman's iPad to his account and left to pick up Noah from the bus stop around 4 p.m. Later, he returned to Jennifer's house, dropped Noah off, and traveled back to the crime scene to dispose of the body. He took the body to a field near Roseford and buried it in a shallow grave. From there, the killer made his way to Tatiana's house, where he spent the rest of the night. Everything was carefully planned, and it would seem that the murderer might have gone unnoticed had it not been for one mistake he made, and it proved fatal. That mistake was letting Noah see his mother's cell phone. That was the key moment that led the police directly to Blair. Law enforcement now had enough evidence to convict Blair, but they decided to investigate further to see if he was guilty. It took the involvement of film experts and a specially trained dog capable of detecting cadaveric odors indoors. First, the dog was brought to Jennifer's home so that it could memorize the woman's scent. There, in her own kitchen, the terrible crime had taken place. The police then directed the dog to Blair's car, and it instantly detected the same depressing odor. It was the last piece of evidence needed to bolster detectives' confidence in Blair's involvement in the murder. On February 8th, after months of investigation, Blair was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, third-degree murder, and theft. He is currently incarcerated at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility with no bail application and awaiting a preliminary hearing where he will have to answer for his horrific acts before the law. Jennifer's friends and family were on the brink of despair when they discovered her dead, but their hearts are still pierced by the pain and shock that the killer was someone they knew and trusted, someone who should have been a close friend to Jennifer and her son. But now that the killer has been identified and brought to justice, they can finally feel that justice has been served. Tiffany Barron, a friend of Jennifer's who spoke on behalf of the family, expressed her feelings during the interview. "I still dream about Jennifer. Noah keeps asking about my mom, and I don't know what to say." At the conclusion of the investigation and trial, if Blair is found guilty, he will spend the rest of his life in custody. The case was solved thanks to the attentiveness of Jennifer's 8-year-old son. The boy noticed a mistake made by the killer. This helped to discover the truth and punish the criminal. The tragedy in Limerick Township serves as another reminder that even the most carefully planned crimes will sooner or later be solved. Meanness and inhumanity will not go unpunished, and the perpetrators will sooner or later be brought to justice before the law.